Welcome back, brothers, to Abalore. Tonight we're diving into what Leman Russ has been doing in the warp. As always, before we get to the madness, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from the Emperor. I want to thank you guys for support. I've been killing it. Now, let's get into the madness.
The first World Eater died with Leman Russ's sword buried so deeply through his breastplate that the point burst from between his shoulder blades in a shower of molten ceramite, blood, and steaming fragments of lung. Russ tore Mjolnir free before the legionary's body had struck the brass causeway and turned the corpse with the motion, using several hundred kilograms of dead transhuman flesh as a shield when the next rank crashed into him beneath a storm of chain-blade teeth. The dying warrior took 3 chain axes across the chest. One bit through the white enamel of his World Eater's plate and entered the heart. Another severed his arm at the shoulder. Russ drove the ruin of him back into his brothers and went through them like winter through rotten timber. Above the battlefield, the heavens had become a wound. An impossible demon world hung upon nothing, its continents chained to one another by bridges broad enough for armored divisions, its mountains beaten from black iron and brass, its oceans pits of coagulated blood whose shores writhed with half-formed things. Armies murdered one another across every horizon. Mortal hosts in their millions surged between fortress complexes that climbed upside down into a sky filled with burning skulls. Demon engines strode through them like predators through grain. Artillery detonations rolled without pause across the valleys, and every explosion threw bodies high enough that for a moment they seemed like birds before gravity remembered them and dragged them back into the slaughter. Russ did not retreat. He had been given enough opportunities for that over the centuries. Armor Elavagar had once been the panoply of a king beneath the cold light of another age. Now its plates were scored by claws, blackened by witchfire, and cratered where weapons forged in realities that had never existed had tried to open him. The runes remained. Some were almost buried beneath scratches deep enough to hold blood. Others shone pale through soot whenever the immaterium pressed too closely, old marks cut by hands that had turned to dust before most of the warriors dying around him had been born. His pale hair hung in ropes around a face streaked with blood that was not all his own, and his beard was clotted black beneath the jaw. He looked less like a king than the thing kings had once invented walls to keep out. A brass scorpion came over the mound of corpses to his left, its multiple legs crushing wounded cult soldiers into red pulp beneath hooked feet, its tail arched, cannon mouth gathering furnace light. Harrick Irontongue shouted a warning over the packfox, but Russ was already moving. He hurled himself beneath the demon engine's first discharge. The blast struck the causeway behind him and liquefied brass across 20 paces. Men screamed as their feet fused into the deck. Russ came up beneath the machine's forward limb and brought Hellwinter around in both hands. The ancient axe struck the joint with a concussion that hammered the air flat. Brass plating burst outward. Something beneath it screamed with the voice of a butchered child. Russ struck again. The limb tore loose in a gush of blood and burning oil, and the demon engine rolled sideways through its own escort, pulping cultists beneath its weight, while one claw continued snapping after it had been separated from the body. Forward, Russ said. There were only 7 voices left to answer him. Once, a king might have called that number a guard. Russ called it what remained. The wolf guard advanced around their gene father in a ragged wedge, firing bolters blackened by centuries of repair. Their armor bore no common pattern anymore. Great crusade plates survived beside components cut from dead traitors and relics reforged so many times that no forge record could have named their origin. Torvald Ashhand fought with a frost blade worn nearly smooth along the fuller. Harrick carried a battered combi bolter whose casing had been replaced with the jawbone of a beast killed on a world swallowed by the eye before the great betrayal had become a memory. They had followed Russ beyond the last sane chart, through kingdoms ruled by demons, through storms where an hour devoured generations, and through silences in which even the warp had seemed afraid to speak. They did not ask what waited at the fortress summit. They knew only that Russ wanted it. That was enough. A champion of the 12th Legion shouldered through the press.
Ahead of them. He was enormous, even for an Astartes, swollen by gifts he had purchased with worlds of blood. Horns had erupted through his helm. Chains hung from his shoulders, threaded through human vertebrae, and his chain axe was broad enough to bisect an ogrin. "Wolf!" he bellowed, and the word boomed through a grill packed with fangs. "Skulls for—" Scornspitter fired into his mouth. The bolt struck behind the teeth and detonated inside the champion's skull. Bone and brain blew from the rear of his helm, but momentum carried him forward. Russ caught the body by the gorget, spun, and rammed it into the warriors behind him. Chain axes struck their dead champion instead of the Primarch. Russ fired twice more through the corpse, each mass-reactive shell punching through the World Eater's ruined torso before detonating inside the warriors beyond. Then, Mjolnir descended. The sword of Bale Knight passed through corrupted plate, collarbone, both lungs, and a secondary heart before emerging at the hip. The legionary came apart in 2 steaming pieces. Russ stepped through the blood and killed the next warrior before the upper half had finished sliding from the lower. The brass Moor's fortress stood above them. Russ had seen citadels built by Perturabo. He had fought beneath the walls of terror and watched the greatest fortress ever raised by human hands drown beneath the artillery of treachery. The structure ahead belonged to a different species of war. Towers of fused skulls rose for miles, each capped by gun emplacements that fired shells filled with screaming souls. Chains thicker than voidship masts descended from the upper bastions into the red abyss beneath the world. Every link bore captives hammered through the spine, some still alive despite bodies that had become little more than skin stretched around bone. At the summit waited Khazagor, the Brass Moor, a greater demon that had ruled this butcher realm long enough for its enemies to mistake longevity for invincibility. Khazagor believed Russ had come for him. That was useful. Russ wanted the prisoner below his throne. The Thousand Sons prognosticator had been taken during one of the endless wars between rival servants of the Pantheon, and every trail Russ had followed through the previous subjective decades ended with the same scarlet glyph and the same impossible coordinate. The sorcerer knew something. Perhaps he knew little. Little was enough. Russ had crossed dead worlds for less. The host closed around them. "Jarl," Harek said over the vox. "Eastern Stair." Russ glanced once. Mortal troops were pouring from a gatehouse overlooking the upper ascent. Thousands. Their armor was crude red plate stamped with the rune of Khorne, but many wore fragments of imperial uniforms beneath it. Auxiliar coats, guard flak, naval pressure suits, the remains of men who had once sworn different oaths. "Break them," Harek laughed. "Aye." The surviving Wolfguard turned their fire upon the mortal officers. Bolter detonations opened torsos and removed heads. Command cadres vanished in sprays of pulverized meat. Russ did not waste time cutting through the entire formation. He killed leadership, standard bearers, and the horned priests, driving the mob onward. The effect was immediate. Men who had marched through artillery without flinching staggered when the pressure of command vanished. Some kept charging, others slowed. A few looked around as though awakening from sleep. Then their warlord dropped his axe. The man was almost 3 meters tall, bloated beneath welded armor. Tubes fed dark fluid into his neck. One eye was gone, replaced by a brass stud hammered directly into the socket. He fell to his knees as Russ reached the command plateau. "Mercy!" the warlord gasped. Russ stopped. Around them, the wolves continued killing. The mortal stared upward at him. Recognition had made his face loose with terror. "In the Emperor's name, by the throne, Lord, I beg—" Russ caught him by the head. The man managed one scream. Russ twisted. Vertebrae separated with a chain of wet cracks. Muscle tore. Skin stretched and split. The warlord's body remained kneeling for an instant after his head came free, blood pumping from the neck in thick arterial surges before the corpse collapsed against Russ's greaves. "Do not speak of my father," Russ said. He threw the head into the survivors. Some fled. Russ watched them run toward the lower causeways where Cornety and forces were already turning their weapons on them. "Officers first," he ordered. "Priests after. Leave none who can bind them back to their master." Torvald looked toward the fleeing thousands. And the rest? They chose their road. That was all. The fortress shook. Something vast landed above them. Karzagor the brass maw unfolded from the smoke. The bloodthirster stood higher than a super-heavy battle tank and broader through the shoulders than the gatehouse behind it. Wings like flayed banners spread against the burning heavens. Its hide was the color of old wounds, split everywhere by scars that leaked fire instead of blood. A brass collar encircled its throat, chained to skulls whose empty mouths whispered praises to slaughter. Its axe was an obscenity of black iron, the blade large enough to cleave a land raider from glacis to engine block. The demons saw Russ. For the first time since the assault began, the battlefield seemed to contract around one point. "Leman!" Karzagor growled. Russ bared his teeth. The bloodthirster charged. Its first blow would have killed a lesser warrior before he understood it had been thrown. Russ moved aside at the last instant. The axe struck the plateau and split it from edge to edge. Brass plates erupted upward. Dozens of mortals disappeared into the fissure. Russ drove Mjolnir across the daemon's ribs, but the blade bit only a handspan before Karzagor's backhand caught him and hurled him through a stone buttress. The impact buried Russ beneath blocks of black masonry. Karzagor roared. The ruin exploded outward. Russ came from it running. He fired Scornspitter into the demon's face. One bolt burst against the cheek. The second punched into an eye and detonated. Karzagor reeled, half its vision becoming a fountain of incandescent gore. Russ was already inside the axe's killing arc. Hellwinter struck its knee. The first blow split armor. The second opened bone. The third nearly removed the leg. Karzagor seized him with one claw and lifted him from the ground. Talons closed around Elavagar. Ancient plates screamed. One claw punched between armor segments and entered Russ's side beneath the ribs. Blood ran down his hip. Karzagor laughed. Russ headbutted it. Bone cracked inside the demon's face. The bloodthirster threw him down and raised its axe. Russ rolled. The blade missed him by less than the width of a hand and buried itself in the plateau. That was what he had been waiting for. Russ rose against the haft, trapped it beneath one arm, and buried Hellwinter into the damaged knee with every fraction of strength in his Primarch body. The joint came apart. Karzagor fell. The sound shook towers. Traitors stopped to watch. Russ climbed the daemon before it could rise. Mjolnir went through its wrist first. Russ hacked again, severing tendons thick as mooring cable. The enormous hand came free, fingers still clawing grooves through the brass. Karzagor punched him with the stump. Russ was thrown sideways, rolled across the demon's chest, and drove the sword of Bale Knight beneath its jaw. He stabbed once, twice, again. Each thrust opened the throat farther. Burning blood flooded across Russ's arms. The demon tried to roar and drowned in its own ruin. Russ hooked one gauntlet beneath the split jaw, planted a boot against Karzagor's collar, and pulled. The bloodthirster convulsed. Russ pulled harder. Its neck opened from throat to breastbone. Vertebrae appeared through ropes of muscle. Russ roared, not a word but a sound older than language, and tore the demon's head backward until the spine came out with it. For an instant, Karzagor remained whole. Then the warp reclaimed it. The corpse became a hurricane. Blood burst outward in a wall. Teeth became burning missiles. Brass fragments screamed through the air. Demonic flesh dissolved into black smoke and red fire. World-eaters were knocked from their feet. Mortals were flayed where they stood. Russ remained inside the storm. When it passed, he was still standing. No one charged him. Then Harrick said very quietly, "Jarl." Russ turned. Harrick lay against the broken steps. A demon blade had entered beneath his abdomen and travelled upward through his body. His breastplate had been forced apart from within. Blood pooled beneath him, almost black against the brass. Part of his intestine lay across. One thigh. One hand held it there as though embarrassed by the disorder. Russ knelt. Harrick's lenses had cracked. One eye looked at him through the opening. "Did we find it?" Russ knew what he meant. "No." Harrick breathed once. "Still ahead?" "Aye." "How far?" Russ could have lied. He had lied to enemies, to brothers, to himself, not to this man. "I do not know." Harrick's mouth twitched. Perhaps it was a smile. "Then hunt well." His hand loosened. Russ remained beside him until the secondary heart stopped. Then he stood and entered Khazugor's throne chamber. The Thousand-Sun sorcerer hung from chains behind the throne, naked except for strips of parchment nailed into his flesh. His skin had been carved with sigils until almost none remained untouched. One eye opened as Russ approached. "You are late," the sorcerer whispered. Russ sat opposite him. "I know what these mean." The sorcerer's expression changed. Russ pointed toward one sigil cut above the heart. Intersection, not destination. Another, beneath the throat. A road that is not a road. He indicated a third along the ribs. A boundary between the Empyrean and something older. The Thousand-Sun said nothing. Russ took his left hand. The first finger broke with a quiet snap. The sorcerer hissed. "You expected me to ask where the tree stands," Russ said. "That is why your master permitted you to know what you know. A barbarian asks where the treasure is buried. A sorcerer answers with a riddle. Both leave satisfied with their cleverness." Another finger broke. The Thousand-Sun stared at him. Russ leaned closer. "There is no tree." For the first time, fear entered the sorcerer's face. "There are crossings," Russ continued. "Warp, real space, the broken paths beneath them. Something touches all three. My priests called it the root road, because men need names for things their minds were not shaped to see." A third finger snapped. "Tell me which crossing Magnus fears." The sorcerer began laughing. Russ waited. Eventually the laughter ended. "You think you are hunting it?" Russ's eyes narrowed. "It has been drawing you." The chamber disappeared. Not physically. Russ's mind fell through the sigils carved into the sorcerer's flesh and saw a network of impossible paths stretching through darkness. Broken webway arches, warp currents, dead worlds, golden lines crossing beneath them like roots beneath soil. And there, far beyond every road he had traveled, something pulsed. Not a tree, not a place, a structure in reality itself. Russ opened his eyes. At last, he knew he was close. Upon Sortiarius, beneath a sky filled with impossible constellations, Magnus the Red opened his single eye. For centuries, one strand within the skein had remained scarlet. Now it burned gold. The Crimson King rose slowly from his throne. He told no one, not Abaddon, not the demon princes who imagined themselves his peers, not even the greater part of his legion. Russ had survived. Russ had learned. Russ was approaching the buried road. Magnus watched the golden strand crawl through futures he had once considered impossible, and something very close to anger stirred within him. He could have revealed the wolf's location long ago. He could have sent armies. He could have allowed others to kill him. He had done none of those things, because a dead hunter could be replaced. A completed hunt could not. Magnus smiled. Let the wolf find the tree. Then the Crimson King would take its answer from his corpse. Bjorn had not knelt. That was what Russ remembered first, not the cold of the fang, though the mountain had groaned beneath a storm that night, and frost had crept in white veins across the iron ribs of the hall, not the braziers guttering beneath the drafts that came screaming down from the upper shafts. not the warriors gathered in the shadowed reaches beyond the throne dais, silent where once they would have laughed, wagered, fought and poured mead across the stones. He remembered Bjorn standing before him, with one hand resting upon the pommel of his blade, and anger in his face so naked that lesser men would have mistaken it for insubordination. "You are leaving." Russ had looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Aye. For where?" "Elsewhere." Bjorn's lip had curled. "Do not play the scold."
"With me, Lord." A few of the warriors in the hall had shifted at that, not because Bjorn had spoken beyond his station. Bjorn had earned the right to speak plainly years before half those listening had been raised from the ice. They shifted because they knew what kind of silence came before a storm. Russ had risen. Even then there had been scars upon armor Elavagar that no artificer had been ordered to remove. Some had been won upon Prospero, others beneath the guns of Horus. More upon worlds whose names the remembrancers had never learned, because the wars upon them had become inconvenient after the great betrayal. Russ wore those scars openly. At the time, Bjorn had thought that was pride. Later, he understood it might have been penance. "You will remain," Russ said. "No." Russ's eyes narrowed. Bjorn stepped forward. It was not defiance. It was worse. It was grief wearing defiance's armor. "You are my Jarl, my Gene father. I followed you to Prospero. I followed you against Horus. I followed you when half the Imperium burned and the rest called us monsters, because monsters were what they needed. Do not tell me I remain while you walk alone into whatever word has caught your scent. You will remain. I heard you. Then learn obedience." Bjorn laughed once, without humor. "From you?" That had almost made Russ smile. Almost. Instead, he turned his head toward the shadows beyond the braziers, where the warriors chosen to accompany him waited. They were not a legion. They were not even a great company. They were a killing pack, assembled from men he trusted enough to take into a place where trust itself might become a weapon. Wolfguard, rune priests, hunters whose names had been spoken around Fenrisian fires long before the Siege of Terror had taught mankind how quickly legends could become corpses. None of them knew the whole purpose of the journey. That ignorance was intentional. The warp listened. Russ had learned that lesson more painfully than most. An oath spoken aloud could become a trail. A desire could become a beacon. A fear could grow teeth. Men who entered the Immaterium believing themselves hunters often discovered too late that the sea beneath reality had been listening to their boasts. So he had told them little. The Allfather was wounded. There was a road. Russ intended to walk it. That was all. Bjorn had watched his lord's face, and because he had served him too long, he had seen what others did not. Fear, not fear of dying. Russ had never been frightened of death in the way mortals understood it. He had been born for violence, shaped for it, educated by it, and where other beings measured danger by the possibility of extinction, Russ had often treated mortality as merely another boundary to test. This was different. Bjorn saw fear because Russ did not know what he was hunting. "You think I cannot follow," Bjorn said. "I know you cannot. Because I lack your strength? No. Because I lack your wisdom?" This time Russ did smile. "You have never suffered from an excess of that." Bjorn ignored the barb. "Then why?" Russ descended from the dais. The hall had been built to make lesser beings feel small. Russ made it feel cramped. He stopped before Bjorn and looked down at him, though Bjorn himself towered over ordinary men. "Because someone must remember." Bjorn frowned. "The priests remember. The skalds remember. The sagas. Sagas lie." The words fell hard. Russ looked beyond him, toward the banners hanging from the stone vaults. Not always because skalds are false. Often because memory cannot bear the shape of what happened, so men hammer it until it becomes something they can carry. They will do the same to us. Bjorn said nothing.
They will make father a god, Russ continued. They will make Horus a devil born wicked. They will make our brothers into saints or monsters, according to which tale is useful. They will make me some beast from a winter story, and forget there was ever a man beneath the teeth. There was bitterness in his voice then. Bjorn heard it. Russ had spent his life allowing men to believe what frightened them. The savage king, the executioner, the emperor's beast. There had been utility in it. Utility had a price. And me? Bjorn asked. Russ looked at him. You will remember differently. Why? Because you were there. The silence between them stretched. Far below the hall, machinery rumbled inside the Fang's depths. The mountain breathed through engines older than many kingdoms. Beyond its walls, Fenris howled beneath the storm. Bjorn's anger did not leave him. It sharpened. You speak as though you do not intend to return. Russ's expression changed by almost nothing. That was answer enough. Bjorn stepped closer. What are you seeking? Russ did not respond. The Allfather? Still nothing. A weapon? No. A way to strike the traitors? No. Then what? Russ looked down at his hands. Those hands had killed kings. They had strangled Xenos monsters in oceans of poison, broken traitor Astartes across stone, gripped weapons while cities burned and brothers died. He had once believed hands such as his could solve anything important. There was always another enemy, always another throat, always another fortress whose gates could be smashed inward. Prospero had taught him otherwise. Horus had taught him again. Terror had finished the lesson. He had obeyed. He had killed. He had hunted. He had fought exactly as he had been made to fight. And at the end, his father sat broken upon a throne that devoured the living to sustain a corpse that was not entirely a corpse. Russ had won wars. The victories had not been enough. I have spent too long killing what was placed before me, Russ said. Bjorn's expression tightened. That is what we were made for. Perhaps. You doubt it? I doubt many things now. That frightened Bjorn more than any confession of fear could have done. Russ had once carried certainty like a blade. Whatever waits beyond the veil, Russ said, I will not find it by sitting upon this mountain waiting for another enemy to arrive. There is something I must seek. What? Russ met his eye. I will not name it here. Bjorn understood then. Not the object. The caution. The warp listened. The realization did not improve his temper. Then take me. No. Damn you. Russ's face hardened. Perhaps. Bjorn's fist closed. Russ leaned down until their faces were close enough that Bjorn could see the pale fractures in his gene father's eyes. You remain because I command it. You remain because this legion has already lost too much. You remain because one day there may be no living thing left that remembers my father as a man, and I will not leave that task to priests who never heard him speak. Bjorn swallowed. Russ straightened. One day, if I return, I may need someone to tell me what became of the Imperium. And if you do not, then tell them I went hunting. That is all. That is enough. It had not been enough. Not for Bjorn. Not then. Russ remembered that as clearly as he remembered anything. He remembered Bjorn's silence when the selected pack marched into the lower vaults. He remembered the old warriors assembling without banners or fanfare. No fleet saluted their departure. No voxcasters proclaimed the beginning of a saga. There were no triumphal horns. They left like thieves. A single vessel waited beneath the mountain, its hull dark, its heraldry deliberately reduced. Rune priests had spent months marking the inner decks with wards derived from Fenrisian tradition and lessons purchased with the blood of psychers who had gone mad attempting to see beyond the eye. Russ had paused once before boarding. Bjorn stood far behind him. Neither spoke. Then the memory broke. Harrick Irontongue lay dead at Russ's feet. The Brass Moor's fortress burned around them. For a moment, Russ did not know which century he stood in. That happened sometimes. The warp did not respect sequence. It chewed years, regurgitated moments, stretched hours into lifetimes, and compressed generations into breaths. Russ had long since ceased trying to measure his journey against the clocks of real space. To him, the hunt had lasted centuries. Perhaps. There had been stretches of time when he had fought for what felt like decades beneath the same unmoving moon. Other voyages had ended moments after they began, despite every warrior aboard growing older. Some of his sons had died almost immediately. Scardy Wolfeye had been dragged through a breach in the Geller field, on what Russ still thought of as the 12th day. He had remained, alive long enough to cut both arms from the demon holding him before the void between realities swallowed them together. Varek Redhand had survived what seemed like 80 years. He died on a nameless world beneath a sky of human faces after a spear of crystallized thought pierced his throat. Gunnar Stoneborn had laughed while dying. Egil Twice Cursed had not. Hrothgar had asked Russ to tell Fenris he had remembered the smell of snow. Harrick had asked whether the hunt was finished. Russ carried every word. He had written none of them down. Parchment burned. Cogitators failed. Stone broke. Memory remained. That was its cruelty. Lord. Russ turned. Torvald Ashhand stood beneath the ruined archway. Blood streaked one side of his helm. The ship lives. Barely. Aye. Then it lives enough. Torvald glanced toward Harrick. Russ did not. Take him. 2 wolves lifted the corpse. They carried Harrick from the fortress, while armies continued murdering one another across the demon world below. The vessel that remained to them had once possessed a name. Russ no longer used it. Names had power in the eye. Too many demons had learned too many of theirs. Its hull was scarred nearly smooth, its original markings buried beneath plates taken from wrecks found across impossible ages. One section of armor had come from an Imperial cruiser Russ knew could not yet have been built when they found it. Another bore a forge mark, belonging to a manufactorum destroyed during the heresy. None of them discussed that anymore. The interior smelled of oil, old blood, cold metal and incense burned by the remaining rune priest. Haldor Rune-Bitten waited in the navigation chamber. He had once possessed both eyes. Now one socket held a stone engraved with a warding rune. The deck around him was carved with concentric circles. Within those circles lay trophies, a shard of wraithbone blackened by warp fire, a horn cut from a demon prince, 3 teeth taken from a beast that had spoken with the voice of a dead Primarch, a fingerbone from a Thousand Suns sorcerer, fragments of crystal that changed color whenever the vessel approached a webway fracture. The newly acquired coordinate had been cut into the deck in blood. Haldor looked at Russ. The current is wrong. It is the right current. That is not what I said. Russ almost smiled. Show me. Haldor pointed toward the largest rune. It moves against the storm. Good. Good? Magnus expects hunters to follow safe roads. Haldor grunted. So we follow the road that looks like death. We have done worse. Aye. The rune priest placed both hands upon the deck. His breathing slowed. The vessel turned. No ordinary navigator could have described what followed. There was no starboard, no port, no ascent. The ship entered a storm that existed as pressure against thought. The Geller field shrieked through the hull. Frost spread across internal bulkheads despite reactor heat. Voices spoke through sealed Vox grills. Russ heard Horus once. He did not answer. The storm opened. Ships appeared around them. Hundreds. Thousands. Some were Imperial. Some had once been. A grand cruiser drifted past with its entire dorsal spine missing, its decks exposed to the void like the ribs of a butchered animal. Russ recognized the heraldry of a chapter he had never known. Another vessel bore the sigil of the Imperial Army from before Guilliman divided the military machine. A third was untouched. Its engines burned clean. Its hull possessed architecture Russ did not recognize. He watched it for several seconds, then saw the Aquila. Wrong. Altered. A future variation. The vessel vanished before he could examine it further. "Do not look too long," Haldor said. "I was not." "You were." Russ ignored him. The ship continued deeper. Hours passed. Perhaps years. Then something struck the hull. Not a weapon. A docking clamp. Torvald's voice came across the Vox. "Contact." Russ drew no weapon. The surviving wolves assembled inside the adjoining passage. The outer hatch had been torn open long ago. Beyond it drifted the wreck of another ship, fused against theirs by the storm. They crossed. The wreck was dark. Its corridors stank of dust, old ash, and something else. Russ stopped. Wolf. Faint. Buried beneath corruption and age. But wolf. Torvald smelled it too. His head snapped toward the left passage. There, beneath a dead lumen strip, hung a corpse. 1,000 suns. The armor was old. Older than many of the traitors Russ had killed in the last century. The warrior had been nailed to the bulkhead, not with spikes, with a blade, broken halfway down its length, Fenrisian steel. Russ approached. He touched the hilt. The metal was cold. The kill was recent. Not recent by real space reckoning. Recent to him. Haldor inhaled sharply. "There is another scent." Russ had already found it. Astartes, 6th Legion. And beneath that, animal, wet fur, blood, mutation, wolfen. Something moved above them. Torvald raised his bolter. "Hold." A shape dropped from the ceiling. It struck one of the wolves hard enough to drive him to one knee. Scavenged armor, claws, a muzzle distorted almost beyond humanity. The wolfen roared. More shapes moved in the dark. Too fast, too low, predatory. The surviving wolf guard formed instinctively around Russ. He did not draw Mjolnir. The first wolfen lunged. Russ caught it by the throat. Its momentum carried both of them backward. Russ slammed it into the bulkhead. Metal buckled. The creature clawed at his arm, talons scraping sparks from a lavagar. Russ pinned it harder. The wolfen's yellow eyes burned with madness. Russ leaned close. Then he roared. Not a roar of anger. A challenge. Old Fenrisian. Older than the chapter that now bore his gene seed. A sound used beneath winter moons before compliance fleets, before terror, before the All-Father's ships had ever entered Fenrisian skies. Every shape in the corridor froze. The wolfen in Russ's grip stopped struggling. Silence followed. Then a voice answered from the darkness. Still making too much noise. Russ released the creature. Footsteps approached. Slow. Armored. A warrior emerged beneath the dead lumen. His plate was a ruin of ages. Grey of the old legion remained across one shoulder. The opposite pauldron had been taken from a traitor and scraped clean of its allegiance. Cables were bound in hide. Brass reinforcement plates covered sections of ancient ceramite. Fenrisian runes had been cut across repairs made by hands that had never seen the forges of the Fang. The face was older, harder, but Russ knew it. Bulvi stopped. For once the warrior had no words. Russ looked beyond him. Shapes emerged from the wreck. Wolves. His wolves. Broken. Changed. Alive. The 13th. For an instant Russ saw all the years between them. The sons he had lost. The wars he had missed. The empire that had continued without him. Bulvi stared at the scarred giant standing before him, as though the warp had finally devised a cruelty too great to believe. Then he lowered his head. "My king." Bulvi did not kneel. He struck one fist against the battered breastplate covering his hearts, bowed his head once and raised it again. The gesture belonged to another age, to a legion that had marched beneath the Emperor's own banners and had not yet been broken into chapters and legends. Russ remembered thousands of warriors making that same salute beneath alien suns. He remembered Bulvi younger, armor whole, beard darker, laughter loud enough to make mortal iterators abandon attempts at conversation. The warrior standing before him now seemed carved from everything the eye had failed to kill. Deep scars crossed his face. One ear was gone. His plate had been assembled from so many dead enemies that almost no complete suit remained beneath it. Yet his eyes were unchanged. Russ looked beyond him at the shadows gathering in the wreck. How many? Bulvi understood the question. He did not pretend otherwise. Here? All. Bulvi's jaw tightened. I do not know. Russ said nothing. The admission cost the old warrior more than any wound. We stopped counting companies long ago, Bulvi continued. Then we stopped counting packs. Some went hunting and did not return. Some crossed storms that closed behind them. Some were taken. Some became things I would not call sons of Fenris, even if they still wore our blood. Others may be alive somewhere in this cursed sea, killing the same enemies we killed yesterday, and believing only a season has passed. How many with you? 73 who can still bear arms. Russ's gaze moved through the darkness. And the others? Bulvi glanced toward the Wolfen. 21 who bear something else. Russ understood. The wreck had become a den. The 13th had occupied compartments where decompression had not yet torn the atmosphere away. Fenrisian hides covered sections of exposed machinery. Chains secured bulkheads that no longer sealed. Ammunition had been stacked according to patterns Russ recognized from the old Legion, though little of it had been manufactured by the same hand. Bolter magazines bore marks from Imperial Forge worlds, traitor manufactoria, and places whose symbols Russ did not know. One warrior carried a bolter with the receiver of an ancient Legion weapon, a magazine housing of later design, and a barrel assembly stripped from a dead Chaos Marine. Another wore a left vambrace, still carrying the faint ghost of an 8-pointed star that had been ground away until the ceramite beneath it showed white. No Imperial eagle taken from the enemy remained intact. The wolves had cut them out first. That pleased Russ, not because the symbol offended him, but because wearing the aquila from the plate of a traitor would have been an obscenity. His sons had remembered enough to know the difference between scavenging armor and inheriting allegiance. Bulvi led him deeper. The 13th watched their gene father pass. Some saluted, others merely stared. Russ knew many of their faces. He did not know all the scars that had been added to them. One warrior had replaced most of his lower jaw with a crude adamantium brace. Another's left arm was a mismatched augmetic, built from mechanicum components so old that even Russ could not remember their pattern. Several had sealed breaches in power armor with hammered brass over layers of cured hide. Runic wards had been scratched into borrowed ceramite with knives rather than engraving tools. Their plate had survived because they had made survival into a religion without priests. "How long since you saw Fenris?" Russ asked. Bulvi grunted. "Which answer do you want?" "The true one." "Then ask a wiser man." They passed a chamber that had once held voidsmen. Something large had nested there. Bones covered the floor. Not human bones. Not entirely. "The Eye gave us 12 years once," Bulvi said, "and then spat us into a place where an Imperial ship claimed 9 centuries had gone by. Another time we fought for what felt like 40 winters, and returned to the same wreck we had left an hour before. I stopped asking the warp for a calendar. A sensible habit. I learned it late." Russ looked at him. "You learned it?" Bulvi snorted. "There is the king I remember." They entered a broader hold. The smell struck first. Wet animal musk, old blood, Astartes sweat, mutation. The Wolfen waited inside. Russ had seen what the curse could do long before mortal scholars invented classifications for it. He had watched warriors become stronger, faster, and less human under the pressure of battle. He had known the Canis Helix was not a simple inheritance. Nothing created from Primarch blood was simple. But centuries in the Eye had sharpened the curse into something crueler. Some of the warriors still retained enough humanity to stand upright. Their armor had been cut away at joints, where bone and muscle had expanded beyond the limits of ceramite. Thick hair covered exposed arms. Fingers had lengthened into claws, capable of cutting through flesh and flak armor without weapons. One looked directly at Russ and managed a rough salute. "Jarl," the Wolfen said. The word emerged through a throat no longer designed for speech. Russ returned the salute. Others had gone farther. They crouched against the walls. Snouts had pushed forward from once human faces. Teeth crowded in large jaws. Their eyes tracked movement with the concentration of predators waiting for weakness. Armor plates had been strapped directly onto bodies that no artificer could have fitted inside an Astartes harness. One wore the remnants of an old 6th Legion pauldron on a shoulder that had become almost twice its original size. Russ entered among them alone. Torvald started forward. Bulvi raised a hand. "No." Russ walked slowly. The nearest Wolfen growled. Another sniffed the air. Then something passed through the pack. It was not obedience. Not exactly. Recognition ran deeper than rank. The first creature lowered, its head. A second followed, then another. Russ felt the change through senses that were themselves not wholly human. Their blood knew him. The thing inside them, the thing Imperial biologist scholars might one day attempt to reduce to mutation and gene expression, knew its source. One Wolfen crawled forward. Its claws scratched against the deck. Russ stopped before it. The creature pressed its forehead against his greave. He rested one gauntleted hand upon its head. "What do you call him?" Bulvi took a moment to answer. "Gunner." Russ remembered a warrior laughing beside a burning pyramid on Prospero. He did not know whether this was the same Gunner. He decided not to ask. "You keep them." Bulvi's expression hardened. "They are my brothers. They are dangerous. So am I. To themselves." Bulvi looked around the chamber. "We tried chains. We tried isolation. We tried prayers, runes, and killing anything demonic enough to blame. Some return to themselves after battle. Some do not. If I abandon them, the warp takes them. If I kill them because their teeth grew long, then I have done the enemy's work." Russ studied him. "And when they cannot tell brother from prey, I do what must be done." There was no pride in the answer. "Good." Russ turned from the Wolfen. "Show me what you found." Bulvi's eyes narrowed. "What makes you think we found anything?" "Because Magnus put a corpse in my path. That corpse was ours. The corpse, perhaps. The path was his." Bulvi stared at him for several heartbeats. Then he laughed. The sound was rusty but genuine. "Aye," he said. "You are still a suspicious bastard. I had good teachers. Some of them were your brothers. Most." Bulvi led him toward the forward compartments. The map was carved across an old bulkhead. It was not a map in any ordinary military sense. There were no systems, no coordinates, no stellar references. Fenrisian runes interlocked with Thousand Suns symbols, Mechanicum notation, and marks cut by claws rather than tools. Lines had been drawn, erased, gouged deeper, and sometimes crossed through so violently that the blade had penetrated the metal. Russ stopped before it. Haldor Rune-Bitten came forward from his own vessel. The rune priest stared. "What is this?" "Our failure," Bulvi said. Russ touched one line. "Where?" "Everywhere." Bulvi indicated the first mark. "Demon world, red sky, city beneath the surface. We found a passage below it that was not warp and not matter. Thousand Suns were already there." Another mark. "Dead craft world fragment. Same thing. They collapsed the route before we reached it." Another. "World made of glass. No sun. Something beneath the crust that our rune priest said felt older than the eye." Thousand Suns again. Russ moved along the wall. "How many?" 17 places where we found enough to be certain." Haldor looked toward him. "The route road." Bulvi glanced sharply at the rune priest. "You know the name?" "We gave it one. We called it the Underpath." Russ continued examining the map. The marks aligned, not in space, in sequence. He saw it now. The failures, the ruins, the places where he had arrived hours too late, decades too late, or perhaps years too early. The demon citadels that had possessed clues too conveniently placed. Sorcerers who knew only enough to push him toward another battlefield. Worlds whose rulers had somehow learned he was coming, despite Russ having spoken his destination to no living thing. Magnus, not merely watching, pruning. Every path the wolf might take had been cut, except those the Cyclops wished him to follow. Russ felt anger rise. Then he killed it. Anger was useful when chosen, not when given. Bulvi watched his face. You know who? I. He has been ahead of us for longer than I can measure. No. Bulvi frowned. Russ tapped the map. He has been beside us. Haldor understood first. Driving us. Russ nodded. Bulvi folded his arms. Then we turn away. No. That surprised him. You would walk into Magnus's snare knowingly? Russ looked at the network carved into the wall. If he wants me on this road, the road matters. He wants you dead. He has had centuries to attempt that. Bulvi's eyes narrowed. Russ turned. The question is not why Magnus wishes to kill me. That answer is older than either of our patients. The question is why he needs me to reach a particular place before he does it. For a heartbeat, Bulvi stared at him. Then his mouth split into a grin. There you are. Russ ignored him. The observatory? Bulvi's grin faded. Close. How close? Close enough to bleed. They attacked before the next change in the storm. The Thousand Suns Observatory occupied a fragment of impossible architecture suspended inside the wreckage of 3 void ships. Its outer walls resembled black stone, until Auspec's returns showed no consistent density. Towers grew from it at angles that contradicted one another. A warrior could stand beneath one parapet and see another version of himself approaching from the opposite direction. Bulvi had spent what he believed were 6 months studying it. Russ took less than an hour to choose the breach, not the weakest wall, the wall the enemy believed strongest. Grey Slayers crossed the gap beneath disciplined bolter fire. They moved like legionaries of the old Sixth, but centuries without armories had changed their methods. Scavenged plasma weapons fired until coils glowed white. Bolters coughed ammunition, manufactured by enemies they had killed. Frost blades and chain weapons came free as soon as the distance collapsed. The Rubricae did not shout. They advanced in perfect silence. Inferno bolts screamed through the dark. The first Grey Slayer took a round through the shoulder. Ceramite flashed molten around the wound. A second bolt entered beneath his gorget and detonated inside the armor. His head vanished in blue fire. The wolves kept moving. A Rubric Marine raised his bolter. A Grey Slayer hit him at full charge and drove a chain blade into the join beneath his arm. The weapon chewed through plate. No blood emerged. Dust poured from the wound like sand from a broken grave. Sorcery bent the corridor. Russ saw the entrance retreat. 10 paces became 100. 100 became 3. An exalted sorcerer stood at the center of the distortion, staff raised, armor blazing with impossible color. Now, Bulvi growled. The flank opened. The Wolfen came through. They did not charge like Astartes. They hunted. One bounded across the wall, struck a Rubric Marine above the waist, and carried him backward. Claws punched through the eye lenses. Another landed among 3 traitors, tore an arm free, and beat the second warrior with it, while the third fired inferno bolts through both combatants. Burning flesh filled the corridor. Russ went through the center. A Scarab occult warrior met him. The Terminator's armor carried enough sorcerous reinforcement to turn aside weapons that would have opened a battle tank. His force stave came down, wreathed in blue fire. Russ caught the haft. The 2 weapons locked. For an instant. Then Russ twisted. The staff snapped. The champion staggered. Hellwinter struck his breastplate. The first blow cratered it. The second split the scarab icon. The third collapsed the entire chest inward until the back of the Terminator armor burst apart and dust erupted from the seams. Russ seized the ruined warrior by the gorget. The exalted sorcerer shouted a word. A ritual circle ignited beneath the floor. Reality opened. Russ threw the Terminator. The body crossed the circle at the instant the spell closed. Something went wrong. The chamber folded. 3 rubricae vanished sideways without moving. Another doubled over as his upper body passed through his own legs. Ceramite stretched into impossible angles. Dust streamed upward and began screaming despite having no lungs. The exalted sorcerer stared. Russ came through the collapsing geometry and removed his head. The observatory died with him. Walls stopped moving. Distances returned. The surviving 1,000 suns were butchered where they stood. Russ found the true map in the highest chamber. No blade had carved this one. It hung in the air. Roots of light extended through darkness. Some were red, some green-black. Others shimmered with impossible colors or pulsed with bruised violet corruption. 4 colossal regions had grown around the outer structure, like cancers feeding from the same body. Haldor stopped breathing. Russ recognized the symbols without needing explanation. Blood, decay, change, excess. The great hungers had reached into the road, but not the center. The center remained gold, not bright gold, wounded gold, an empty radiance surrounded by broken webway geometry. Russ stared at it. How far? Bulvi stood behind him. We reached the edge once. Russ turned. Bulvi's face had changed. For the first time since their reunion, the warrior looked uncertain. What happened? We heard something. A voice? No. Bulvi looked toward the wolfen gathering in the doorway. A heartbeat. Russ said nothing. Every one of them fell to his knees, Bulvi continued. Even those who had forgotten their own names. Even those who had tried to kill us an hour earlier. All of them. Haldor whispered. The All-Father. Bulvi rounded on him. I did not say that. The rune priest fell silent. Bulvi looked back at Russ. I do not know what waits there. I do not know whether it was your father, some old weapon, or a thing that learned how to smell our hopes. But it knew us. Russ's expression became still. How? Bulvi answered softly. It recognized the blood of the 6th. For a long time, there was only the hum of the dying observatory. Russ looked into the golden wound. Then he turned to his sons. Gather ammunition. Repair what can be repaired. Strip the dead of anything worth carrying. Feed those who can still eat. Bind those who cannot remember themselves. Bulvi watched him. How long? Russ took Mjolnir from the corpse at his feet and wiped the blade clean across the dead sorcerer's robes. Until we are ready. For what? Russ looked once more toward the impossible map. For centuries he had hunted a road. Now he knew the enemy had fortified it. Not a hunt, he said. Hellwinter rested across his shoulder. A siege. The world had forgotten that flesh was supposed to end at the skin. Russ saw that before he saw anything else. Below the strike vessel, continents heaved beneath a sky the color of infected bile. Mountain chains pulsed with slow internal contractions, their ridges split by wet fissures that opened and closed as though breathing. Rivers carried green-black fluid toward oceans so choked with bodies that the surface moved in layers, the upper dead rising and falling upon tides, driven by decomposition beneath them. In places, the water had become too thick to flow. It bulged against shorelines of cartilage and calcified bone, while islands formed from the fused remains of creatures that had died, rotted, grown fungal towers from their carcasses, and then died again. Above all of it rose the hive. It should have been a city. It breathed instead. Spines of rusted iron and ancient plasteel punched upward through swollen masses of diseased tissue. Hive towers leaned together beneath their own weight, linked by arterial transit lines in which trains moved like clots through translucent tubes. Manufactorum stacks exhaled vapors thick with spores. Vast intake vents opened and closed across the lower hive, drawing in air with a sound like a dying beast, attempting to fill ruined lungs. Between the towers, billions lived and worked beneath a sun they had never seen clearly. Generations had been born into the same rot until filth had become climate. Sickness had become inheritance, and the idea of another world was something whispered by madmen before the overseers took them to the rendering halls. Haldor Rune-Bitten stood beside Russ, beneath the observation blister, the stone in his ruined eye socket, leaking a thin thread of blood. "There," the rune priest said. Russ did not need him to point. He felt it. Something beneath the largest hive. Not light, not sound. A pressure inside the marrow, the corrupted root. The golden wound they had seen within the Thousand Suns Observatory passed beneath this world, but something had grown over it, around it, into it. Nurgle had found the road and planted a garden. Bulvi came to stand behind them. How many? Russ knew what he meant. The Auspec's returns were impossible to quantify with precision. Haldor's machine spirits protested every attempt. The lowest estimate for the hive population had already passed into the billions. "Too many," Russ said. Bulvi looked at him. "That has never stopped you before." "It does now." Russ turned from the blister. "We are not taking the hive." No one argued. That alone marked how far the sons of Fenris had traveled from simpler wars. The wolves went down in packs, not companies, not battle lines, hunters. The vessel descended through storm layers, thick with corrosive rain, and spores large enough to burst against the hull like fistfuls of wet ash. No gunship formation announced them. No bombardment preceded their landing. The 13th entered through broken transit shafts, ventilation scars, abandoned waste conduits, and passages that had once serviced a hive city before the hive itself became something alive enough to resent maintenance. Russ took 8 with him. Bulvi led another pack along a parallel route. The Wolfen ranged ahead. They moved without lumen or vox. Their noses found what Auspex could not. The lower hive smelled of hot metal, corpse fat, human waste, and sweet rot. Russ had walked through slaughterhouses on conquered worlds. He had seen abattoirs large enough to feed planetary armies. This was worse because nothing here was wasted. Men and women were disassembled in stages beneath hanging chains. Flesh went one way, bone another. Fat was rendered into lamp fuel and industrial lubricant. Teeth were sorted into bins. Hair was wound into coarse cable. Organs that still functioned were packed in nutrient slurry. Diseased organs were not discarded. They were pulped and fed into vats from which swollen larvae were later harvested. The workers had stopped reacting to it. That disturbed Russ more than screaming would have. A man with half his face lost to lesions dragged a cart beneath a conveyor carrying severed limbs. His exposed jawbone moved while he hummed to himself. Another worker pushed metal hooks through cadavers without bothering to wipe the pus running from his own eyes. A child-sized servitor crawled beneath them, swollen with parasites that bulged visibly beneath grey skin. Russ stepped over it. The servitor looked up. Its mouth opened. 3 tongues moved inside. "Work quota," it whispered. Then it crawled onward. Torvald Ashhand walked beside Russ. His frost blade remained sheathed. "Burn it." Russ looked at him. "All." "Not yet." Torvald said nothing. The pack passed through a chamber where captured Imperial soldiers had been integrated into an ammunition press. Some were still alive. Their limbs had been amputated and their torsos fused into iron frames. Tubes entered the abdomen. Hydraulic pistons moved through their bodies in rhythm with the machinery. Each time a shell casing rolled down the line, one of the prisoners convulsed. A guardsman turned his head toward Russ. The movement took effort. One eye remained. He saw the armor, the wolf head icon. Something impossible happened to his face. Hope. "Emperor," he croaked. Russ stopped. The guardsman tried to speak again. No sound came. Torvald looked toward the corridor behind them. "We cannot carry him." "No." Russ drew Mjolnir. The guardsman understood. His eye closed. The blade entered the base of his skull, and ended what the plague foundries had refused to end. Russ withdrew it. Move! They went deeper. The pattern became clear only after several levels. The hive was not merely diseased. It was functional because of the disease. The manufactoria, corpse vats, plague furnaces, and population blocks formed a ritual structure spread across hundreds of kilometers. Every infection fed another. Every death generated biological matter. Every birth replaced labor. Every prayer of despair. Every fevered hallucination. Every corpse that burst open beneath green flies contributed to something beyond physical production. Haldor crouched beside a gutter where black fluid ran between cracked stones. He touched 2 fingers to it. The rune priest recoiled. Not water. Russ waited. Souls. Bulvai's voice came over the packvox. We found the same. Russ keyed the rune channel. Explain. Haldor wiped his fingers against the deck. The disease binds them, not just flesh. Every death feeds downward. The root. Aye. Russ stared into the gutter. Tiny faces seemed to move beneath the surface. They disappeared when he looked directly. The wolves continued. They found the living in the old transit vaults. At first, Russ thought they were another plague cult. Then one man raised a piece of rusted metal like a weapon and shouted for the others to run. Not praise, not laughter. Fear. Human fear. The pack stopped. There were hundreds beneath the transit arches, perhaps more hidden in surrounding chambers. They were thin enough that bones showed through skin. Many had wrapped their faces in cloth to avoid spores. Crude charms hung from necks. Some bore ancient imperial symbols, worn smooth through generations of handling. A grey-bearded man stood at the front. He looked at Russ, then at the wolf icon. You are real. Russ had heard stranger greetings. Aye. The man started laughing. It turned into coughing. Blood spotted his hand. We kept the old words. Russ glanced toward Haldor. The rune priest gave a slight shake of his head. Not enough. Not yet. What words? Russ asked. The throne, terror, the Emperor protects. The final phrase spread through the chamber. Quietly at first, then louder. Russ felt something inside him turn hard. Not worship. He had never been comfortable hearing his father called a god. But these people had remembered across generations of rot. That mattered. How many? He asked. The old man hesitated. In the tunnels, maybe 12,000. Can they move? Some. Russ looked toward Bulvai's rune marker on his helm display. The transit complex lay close to the buried route. Too close. Move them to the western platforms, Russ ordered. Anyone who can walk carries someone who cannot. Take water. No machinery unless it is clean. The old man stared. You are taking us out? Russ answered, before thinking too long about it. Yes. Hope moved through the chamber like fire. The wolves held the passages, while the survivors gathered. The enemy came quickly. Plague Marines entered through the eastern concourse beneath clouds of flies so dense that they appeared as smoke. Their armor was swollen and cracked. Ceramite split around distended flesh. Horns pushed from pauldrons. Rusted bolters fired shells that burst into clouds of infected fragments. The first round struck a grey slayer in the thigh. The armor held. The thing inside the shell did not care. Worms poured from the impact crater and began chewing into the seal. The warrior tore the plate free and stamped the infestation into paste. Then the firing line answered. Bolters thundered through the transit vault. A plague marine lost half his head and continued walking. Another took 3 rounds through the chest. The detonations opened him from sternum to spine, spilling black organs thick with maggots. He looked down at the ruin, as though mildly interested, and raised his weapon again. The wolfen reached him first. Claws entered beneath the gorget. The demon-touched Astartes came apart in chunks. Rot sprayed across the wall. Keep them moving, Russ said. The refugees moved. For a time, it worked. Then Haldor stopped. He had been examining one of the survivors, a young man, too thin, no visible lesions, no swelling, nothing. Haldor put a hand against his chest. The stone eye glowed. The young man screamed. A shadow moved beneath his skin. Not flesh, something deeper. Haldor staggered back. Russ knew before he spoke. No. The rune priest looked sick. Russ had seen Haldor stand beneath demon fire without changing expression. That told him enough. It is in them. The old man heard. In who? Haldor did not answer. Russ did. All of you. Silence. The refugees stared at him. The battle continued behind the sealed eastern doors. Bolter fire hammered through metal. How? The old man asked. Haldor forced himself to speak. The plague is not only in the body. We are not sick. You are. The man shook his head. We have lived here all our lives. That is why. Russ looked toward the western transit gate. Beyond it lay the way down, the route road. If the refugees crossed it, the corruption crossed with them. Not merely bacteria, not spores. Something carried in the soul. Can it be cut out? Russ asked. Haldor met his eye. No. Burned? Not without burning the bearer. How long? Before it spreads to the root? Yes. Haldor looked toward the floor. It may already be touching it. The old man stepped closer. You said you were taking us out. Russ faced him. I was. You swore. I gave an order. To save us. Aye. And now? Russ said nothing for a heartbeat. The old man understood. Behind him people began murmuring. Some prayed. Others cursed. A mother held a child against her chest. Russ looked away from neither. You cannot leave. The words were quiet. They carried farther than shouting. The old man's face emptied. No. The sickness in this place is bound to you. We can be cleansed. Not here. Then take us somewhere that can. There is nowhere I can take you before it spreads. You do not know that. Haldor does. The rune priest looked down. The old man pointed at Russ. You said the Emperor sent you. I did not. We waited for you. I know. Then save us. Russ felt every eye upon him. He thought of the throne, of the golden wound, of his father's ruined body, of the centuries behind him, of Harrick, of every son whose name he remembered. If he opened the gate, perhaps 12,000 humans escaped. Perhaps they carried Nurgle's touch directly into the thing that might yet reach Terra. There was no equation, only a choice. Russ made it. Seal the western gate. Torvald turned his head. No one else moved. Russ repeated it. Seal it. The blast doors began descending. The sound changed everything. People ran. The old man struck Russ in the chest with both hands. It was like striking a fortress wall. You bastard! Russ let him. Others surged forward. The wolves raised weapons. Russ lifted one hand. No. The gate descended. A man threw a metal bar. It struck Russ's pauldron and bounced away. Someone screamed the Emperor's name. Someone begged. Someone promised service. Someone cursed Fenris. The old man kept hitting Russ until the gap beneath the door was too small to pass. You are his son. Russ looked at him through the narrowing space. Aye. Then act like it. The door closed. Russ stood before it. No one spoke. The pounding from the other side continued. Then Russ turned. Burn the hive. They reached the plague reactor nexus beneath the manufactorum spine. It was not a reactor by any mechanicum definition that deserved the word. Ancient plasma systems had been fused with organic vats kilometers across. Diseased tissue grew around coolant pipes. Human bodies hung in chains over containment wells, their blood dripping into systems that should have required no blood at all. Haldor located the control arteries. Bulvi planted charges. The 13th rigged captured munitions into the failing systems. Russ remained until the last pack withdrew. Then he looked once toward the levels above. Billions. He gave the order. The world opened. The first reactor detonation removed the lower hive. Not destroyed. Removed. A white-green sun expanded beneath the city and turned foundation levels into incandescent vapor. Towers sank as their supports disappeared. Entire districts folded inward, millions of bodies sliding into the growing crater. Organic structures burst under the pressure, spraying curtains of blood and infected fluid across kilometers. Secondary reactors ignited. The hive began eating itself. Oceans of corpse matter boiled. Fungal forests caught fire. Transit arteries split and disgorged trains filled with burning passengers into streets collapsing beneath them. Russ watched from a high causeway. He did not turn away. A king who ordered death had no right to hide from it. The counterattack rose from the burning city. Plague-bearers climbed out of corpse piles by the thousands. Demon engines dragged themselves from ruptured foundries, metal frames swollen with intestines and pustules. Plague marines advanced through fire that burned the flesh from lesser beings. The wolves withdrew through hell. Bolters emptied. Chain blades clogged with wet tissue. Wolfen disappeared beneath masses of demons and erupted from them seconds later, covered in black blood. A diseased tank vanished under a wave of infected civilians, driven forward by demonic compulsion. The bodies jammed its tracks. More climbed over them. By the time the crew escaped, the vehicle had become a hill of twitching flesh. Russ killed without counting. Mjolnir opened plague marines from hip to shoulder. Hellwinter shattered demon skulls. Scornspitter barked until the weapon ran dry. Then Torvald stumbled. Russ saw. It. Small. Almost nothing. The Wolfguard corrected himself and continued. 2 paces later, he stumbled again. Torvald. I know. Russ approached. Torvald removed his helm. His eyes had changed. Something green moved behind the left one. Not across it. Behind it. His skin twitched along the jaw. I sealed the plate. Aye. Nothing breached. I know. Torvald laughed once. Clever rot. A lump moved beneath his throat. He swallowed it back. Bulvi stepped forward. Rune priest. No, Torvald said. Haldor stopped. Torvald looked at Russ. Before I forget. Russ knew. Your name is Torvald Ashhand. For now. The thing behind his eye moved again. Torvald bared his teeth. Do it while I can still hate you for it. Russ drew Mjolnir. No prayer. No farewell. The blade moved. Torvald's head left his shoulders before Bulvi could speak. The body remained standing for a heartbeat, then fell. Black-green tendrils burst from the neck stump. Russ crushed them beneath his boot. Hours later, when the wolves reached the buried threshold and the world above them burned from horizon to horizon, Russ took a knife to armor Elavagar. He carved Torvald's rune beside Harrick's. Only then did he look toward the root. The diseased corruption had withdrawn. Where black-green infestation had wrapped itself around the broken path, a single line of gold now shone through the dark. Haldor stared. It reacted. Russ watched the light pulse. No. He thought of the sealed refugees, the burning hive, Torvald's head falling. It judged. Far away upon Sortiarius, Magnus watched the same line turn gold within a pool of impossible glass. For the first time, the Crimson King did not smile. He had expected Russ to attack. He had expected Russ to rage. He had expected the old executioner to choose the lives before him and damn the greater purpose out of stubborn loyalty. Instead, the wolf had killed what he wished to save. Magnus leaned closer to the vision. That was new and dangerous. The brute had learned to choose. The world beneath them was not a world so much as a weapon that had forgotten whom it was meant to kill. Brass covered everything. It formed continents, mountain chains, citadels, oceans, roads, and the bones of cities so immense that entire armies could vanish inside a single gatehouse and never be seen again. The planet possessed no seas of water. Where oceans should have been, Molten metal rolled beneath clouds of ash, every tide stirred by buried furnaces that had burned without interruption for centuries. Causeways broad enough to carry armored armies crossed those incandescent gulfs, constructed from fused skeletons, crushed tanks, and the rib cages of creatures that had once been large enough to prey upon titans. Fortresses stood upon those bridges at intervals measured in hundreds of kilometers. Their walls were lined with guns the size of hive towers. Every muzzle flashed. Every flash became an earthquake. The war had already been old when the 13th first found it. It had not become tired. Khorne did not tire of blood. Tzeentch did not tire of possibility. So the armies continued to kill. Russ stood before the observation glass and watched a continent burn. There were too many combatants to count. Haldor's Auspex systems abandoned exact estimation after the first sweeps returned figures that changed between one heartbeat and the next. Mortal cult armies filled trench systems extending farther than the curvature of the world permitted. Beastmen charged in black herds beneath banners made from flayed human skin. Mutant artillery crews dragged shells larger than hab blocks into breech-loading cannons, while slave populations worked winches until muscle tore from bone and replacement slaves stepped over them. Demons appeared wherever the slaughter became sufficient to interest them, some climbing bodily from pools of blood, others unfolding from impossible angles inside storms of sorcerous fire. Across the northern horizon, a Khornate demon engine larger than an Imperial Titan tore the head from a crystalline war machine and hurled it through a formation of mortal troops. The impact erased thousands. A second later, a beam of violet witchfire crossed 300 kilometers and struck the demon engine in the chest. Half its torso vanished. It continued fighting. Bulvi came to stand beside Russ. "We are not taking that." "No." "Good." Russ glanced at him. "You sound disappointed." "I am learning wisdom." "Then the Eye has finally performed a miracle." Bulvi grunted. Below them, artillery opened along an entire continental front. The bombardment began as distant light. Then the horizon became white. Mountain ranges disappeared beneath overlapping detonations. Brass ran molten. Entire mortal formations numbering in the millions ceased to exist before the sound of the first impact reached them. Russ watched the pattern. Not the killing, the movement. Armor columns flowed from fortress belts toward the eastern fronts. Khornate reserves advanced along 6 primary causeways. Supply caravans followed behind them, not merely ammunition and fuel, but captive populations driven toward ritual slaughter grounds so that demon cohorts could be sustained close to the fighting. On the opposing side, obelisks taller than orbital towers pulsed with blue and violet light. Every pulse tore a wound in reality, translating fresh warriors onto the field. Rubricae marched from several of those breaches, silent beneath storms of dust and flame, alongside mortal hosts whose banners carried symbols of the Changer of Ways. Bulvi followed Russ's gaze. "You see something." "I see hunger." "That narrows nothing." Russ pointed. "Those fortresses feed the Red Armies. Those obelisks feed the sorcerers." "Aye. Neither side can destroy the other, because each replenishes faster than the other can exploit victory." Bulvi looked again. "So?" Russ's mouth shifted. "We help them." Bulvi stared at him. For several heartbeats he said nothing. Then, "I liked you better when your plans involved axes." "They still do." "That answer does not comfort me." Russ turned from the glass. Within the hour, the packs were moving. The first set of coordinates came from a Khornate command crypt taken by the 13th decades earlier by their reckoning. They identified reserve tunnels beneath 3 major fortresses, routes concealed from Tzeentchian diviners by layers of ritual bloodletting and walls lined with null bone. Bulvi's Grey Slayers carried the coordinates into a battlefield ruin overlooking enemy territory and left them inside the gutted remains of a sorceress relay station where Tzeentch's mortal servants would inevitably find them. The second set, was more dangerous. Those coordinates identified the translation obelisks, whose destruction would temporarily blind the Changer's reinforcement lattice. Russ gave them to Khorne himself. Not literally. He gave them to what passed for command among Khorne's servants. A captured warlord was released after Haldor burned false memories into the man's dreams, using Fenrisian runecraft. Russ did not ask him to explain. The warrior staggered back to his own lines, believing he had torn the secret from a dying Thousand Suns sorcerer. The lie spread. Warriors who distrusted one another believed it because it promised slaughter. That was the useful thing about fanaticism. It could be predicted. Within hours, fortresses that had hoarded reserves for decades opened their gates. The world convulsed. Cornete armor columns poured from the east in lines that stretched beyond sight. Tanks made from brass, iron, and fused bone advanced alongside captured Imperial war machines, scarred of their old heraldry. Predators, land raiders, and engines that had once served legions before Russ's departure crawled beneath banners dripping blood. Behind them came mortal hosts, so vast that they darkened entire plains. The Tzeentchian response was immediate. Obelisks ignited, the sky fractured, silver towers translated through storms of blue fire. Rubric marines marched from portals in ranks without end. Mutant cavalry spilled onto causeways, already carpeted with corpses. Sorcerers opened breaches large enough for demons to cross in companies. Both sides saw the same thing. A decisive moment. Neither understood that Russ had created it. The wolves descended. They moved beneath the war, not through its heart, beneath it. Maintenance tunnels crossed the brass continents like arteries. Grey slayers entered through exhaust vents wide enough for thunderhawks. Wolfen climbed inside drainage shafts filled with clotted blood. Haldor and the surviving rune priests moved between packs, laying marks against the walls and twisting the empiric turbulence just enough that the psychic presence of the Sons of Russ disappeared beneath the greater storm of the war above. It was not invisibility. Nothing in the warp was invisible. It was camouflage. A wolf did not need the elk to see nothing. It needed the elk to look elsewhere. Their objective was a citadel sunk into the equatorial fortress belt. 3 massive anchors beneath it fastened the corrupted route to the brass world. The Thousand Suns map had shown the infection as a knot of red light wrapped around gold. Cut the anchors. Break the knot. That was the hunt. The war above would do the rest. Russ surfaced once. He did so because he needed to be seen. The Cornete warlord awaiting him was called Varkul Blood Anointed, though Russ doubted that had been the name given to him by whatever mother had first held him. The creature had become more armor than flesh. His body expanded beneath layers of demon-forged plate until he stood almost as high as a Contemptor dreadnought. His axe burned with captive souls. 8 skulls hung from chains around his waist, each still whispering. Russ entered his command bastion alone. The first guards died before Varkul understood who had come. Mjalnar took one through the throat. Hellwinter opened another from shoulder to sternum. Scornspitter killed the third as he turned toward an alarm rune. Varkul roared and charged. Russ met him. Their weapons struck hard enough to break the floor beneath them. Varkul laughed. Wolf King. Russ gave ground. The warlord mistook it for weakness. Useful. Russ let the next axe blow scrape across Elavagar, showering the chamber in sparks. He stepped inside the return stroke, drove one gauntlet into Varkul's throat, and struck Hellwinter into the warrior's hip. The axe bit through plate and lodged in bone. Varkul screamed. Russ tore the weapon free. Then he left. He simply turned and withdrew through the burning bastion. The warlord's disbelief followed him. So did the eyes of Tzeentch. Russ knew they were watching. That was the point. By the time Varkul reached his strategium, half his command cadre had already convinced itself of the only explanation that satisfied pride. Tzeentch had sent Leman Russ to assassinate him. The story traveled faster than truth could have. Within the hour, Varkal redirected 3 armies toward the nearest translation obelisk. By the second hour, his allies had copied him. The front exploded. Bulvi found Russ in the maintenance vault beneath the citadel. You let him live. Aye. You wounded him and walked away. Aye. You have changed. Russ looked at him. No. Bulvi laughed. No, you have. They breached the citadel, while Varkal's armies crashed into the Thousand Suns positions. The outer doors were not designed for Astartes. They were designed for giants. That made them difficult to destroy. It also made them difficult to defend once opened. Haldor overloaded the locking wards. Grey Slayers planted melter charges along the hinges. The doors came inward in slabs of glowing brass. The wolves went through. The corridor beyond became a butcher's trench. Corneta legionaries charged from both directions. Chain axes struck sparks from walls. Bolter fire detonated in confined space, turning bodies into fragments that ricocheted from armor. A Grey Slayer lost his lower arm and continued fighting with the bone protruding through the stump. Another took a chain axe through the chest and pinned the weapon inside his own body, long enough for Bulvi to kill its owner. Blood rose around their boots, then around their greaves. Drainage systems clogged with flesh. The Wolfen came through a maintenance opening above the defenders and dropped among them. One landed on a World Eater's shoulders and tore his helm away with both hands. Another ripped open a legionary's abdomen and dragged loops of intestine across the floor while the warrior tried to keep firing. The corridor filled with the stink of blood, burned propellant, and ruptured transhuman organs. Russ ignored all of it. First anchor. A pack broke left. Second. Bulvi vanished right. Russ took the center. The citadel shifted around him. Not sorcery, machinery. Massive gears turned within the walls as defensive bulkheads reconfigured the internal passages. The fortress had been built to channel invaders into killing chambers. Russ struck Hellwinter into a support column. Haldor stared at him. That is not the anchor. I know. Russ struck again. The column cracked. Something heavy groaned above them. The ceiling shifted. You are breaking the fortress. Aye. That was not the plan. It is now. They found the demon prince waiting beneath the third anchor. It had once been Astartes. Perhaps. Enough remained for Russ to recognize the arrogance. Its armor had fused into a red-black shell over swollen flesh. Wings dragged behind it, pierced through with chains. One horn curled down beside a face preserved in the expression of permanent rage. The creature smiled. I remember you. Russ stopped. Many do. The Night of the Wolf. The words carried old poison. Russ said nothing. I remember Angren laughing while your sons died. Still nothing. The demon prince stepped forward. I remember Prospero. Mjalna remained lowered. The prince's smile widened. Does that name still wound you? Russ looked past him, not at the creature, at the columns holding the chamber. The prince noticed too late. Russ moved, not toward him, sideways. Hellwinter struck the first column. Brass split. The demon prince roared and charged. Russ had already reached the second. The axe struck. The ceiling sagged. You coward. Russ ignored him. The third column broke. Half the chamber came down. Hundreds of tons of brass collapsed. The demon prince disappeared beneath it. Russ was thrown forward by the impact and rolled beneath a rain of debris. Haldor vanished behind dust. The entire citadel lurched. Something screamed beneath the wreckage. Russ climbed. One claw emerged, then a horn. The demon prince forced its head through twisted brass, one side of its face crushed. You deny me battle? Russ stepped onto its chest. No. Hellwinter came down. The horn broke. Again. The skull cracked. Again. Bone opened. Russ crouched and drove Mjalna through the fracture until the blade entered the brain. The demon prince convulsed. Russ twisted the sword. You had your battle. The body dissolved beneath him. Haldor emerged from the dust. The anchor. Russ pointed. The collapse had exposed it. A column of red-black energy penetrated the chamber floor and descended into nothingness. The rune priest understood. Now. Across the citadel, 3 packs acted together. Charges detonated beneath the first anchor. Bulvi cut the second free, with a stolen melter weapon fired until its containment coils ruptured. Russ and Haldor broke the third. The citadel screamed. Not metaphorically. Every wall screamed. The sound passed through armor and bone. The entire fortress belt shook. Outside, both armies assumed the enemy had unleashed a new weapon. They responded appropriately, by escalating. Artillery doubled. Demon hosts flooded onto the field. Obelisks overloaded as sorcerers forced more reinforcements through failing portals. Cornate reserves charged before orders reached them. Battles that had already contained millions became storms of bodies extending from horizon to horizon. The citadel began sinking. The corrupted root beneath it tore open. Gold appeared. Russ saw it through the collapsing floor. Not light, structure, something beneath reality. The wolves descended while the fortress died above them. Behind them, continents burned. Mortal armies continued slaughtering one another by the billion. Bulvi joined Russ at the edge of the breach. "Will the Scalds call this your victory?" Russ looked back once. The horizon had become a wall of fire. "No." Bulvi raised an eyebrow. Russ turned toward the darkness below. "A war does not need to know your name to have been won by you." They descended. The brass ended. For the first time since the hunt began, the root stood before them without veil or metaphor. Broken webway arches hung in impossible darkness, pale material curving through space where distance had no meaning. Golden structures extended between them like roots, searching through dead soil. Some were thin as veins. Others were broader than void ships. Where they passed through shattered webway stone, the 2 substances had fused. Haldor approached one. He did not touch it. The surface moved. Not mechanically. It pulsed, slowly, almost organically. Bulvi stared. "Tell me that is stone." Russ watched another golden root flex inside the broken architecture. No. Above them, the brass ocean continued killing itself. Below it, something older than the war was alive. Magnus had always believed ignorance was a kind of violence. The ignorant man destroyed because he did not understand. The ignorant king condemned because he feared what lay beyond his comprehension. The ignorant warrior mistook obedience for virtue because obedience spared him the burden of thought. Magnus had spent most of his existence surrounded by such men, some ordinary, some gifted, some born from the same impossible design that had fashioned him. Of all his brothers, none had embodied that particular sin more perfectly than Leman Russ, or so Magnus had once believed. He stood upon the uppermost terrace of the pyramid of Photep and watched Sortiarius dream beneath him. The demon world did not possess weather in any conventional sense. Its sky changed according to thought, ritual, memory, and pressure from the Empyrean. At that moment, vast spirals of violet cloud turned around a single dead star, while towers of blue crystal drifted slowly above oceans made from mirrored glass. Cities rose and collapsed in the distance without sound. Silver towers hung in the atmosphere, like blades suspended by an unseen executioner. Every surface carried symbols, and every symbol carried meanings nested inside other meanings, until even a mortal psyker attempting to read the outermost layer would have gone blind. Magnus saw them all. He saw the movement of his legion through hidden vaults beneath the pyramids. He saw the countless rubricae standing motionless in sealed halls, armor perfectly preserved, while the remnants of their bodies whispered as dust against the inside of ceramite. He saw sorcerers disputing over fragments of prophecy, cultists bleeding themselves dry before shrines whose gods had never known their names, and demons scratching at wards they had spent centuries trying to understand. He saw possibilities branching outward in skeins so numerous that language became useless for describing them. And among those possibilities, burned one thread of gold. Magnus regarded it in silence. Russ had survived the brass ocean. That fact did not surprise him. Surprise implied insufficient preparation. Magnus preferred irritation. He had accounted for Russ's strength, endurance, stubbornness, and capacity for violence. He had accounted for the primitive cunning that the Wolf King concealed beneath the behavior of an animal. He had accounted for the loyalty of the 13th, for the unpredictable utility of the Wolfen, for the residual craft of Fenrisian rune priests, and even for those infuriating moments when Russ survived by instinct, in circumstances where instinct should have been irrelevant. What Magnus had not accounted for was refinement. The wolf was learning. That was inconvenient. Magnus turned from the terrace. A circle of light followed him across the black crystal floor, though no sun illuminated the chamber. The light did not come from above. It came from him. He descended into the observatory beneath the pyramid. There, suspended inside a sphere of psychic force, floated a model of something no mortal cartographer could have drawn. Webway fragments intersected with immaterial currents. Broken paths twisted around black regions of unreality. Golden structures appeared and disappeared depending upon the angle from which Magnus considered them. The root. Not a tree, never a tree. Men saw trees because men required metaphor. Roots descending into darkness, branches reaching toward light, growth, memory, renewal. The image satisfied a species raised beneath skies and dependent upon soil. The truth was less comforting. The root was architecture and organism, pathway and memory, mechanism and psychic scar. It existed partly within the webway, partly within the Empyrean, partly within the material universe, and partly somewhere Magnus still could not define despite millennia of study. That offended him. There were few things Magnus hated more than an unanswered question. He reached one hand toward the model. The golden lines shifted away. Magnus smiled faintly. You remember. The first time he had found the scar had been after his greatest triumph, and greatest failure had become the same event, the webway. He remembered the Emperor's project as sensation rather than history. The wards, the barriers, the impossible pressure of his father's design. The moment Magnus, believing himself necessary, had forced a path where no path should have been opened. He had learned much from that disaster, not enough to undo it, enough to recognize the wound it left behind. In the ages that followed, Magnus had sought every fracture connected to that event. He had examined broken webway passages abandoned by the Eldari. He had dissected demon worlds grown around psychic scars. He had forced captive seers to look into places where their species' ancestors had forbidden themselves to look. Eventually, he found the root. He tried to command it. The root moved. He tried to bind it. Its paths folded inward and vanished. He tried to enter by force. 1,000 possible entrances became none. He used demons. They dissolved. He used mortal psychers. They forgot their own names before taking 3 steps. He sent sorcerers. Some returned centuries later believing only minutes had passed. Others came back as children. Several returned dead, but continued speaking for days. Then Magnus understood. The root did not yield to power. Power was the simplest language in the warp. The ruinous powers understood power. Demons understood it. Primarchs understood it. The root appeared to require something else. Sacrifice, choice, persistence. Not because those virtues were morally significant. Magnus rejected that sentimental explanation. The mechanism was deeper. A traveler changed through repeated choices, created a psychic continuity strong enough to remain coherent across paths that otherwise rearranged themselves. The root did not open for the strongest. It opened for the one who became capable of carrying the path within himself. Magnus had found that conclusion intolerable. Then he thought of Russ. The irony had almost been amusing. A creature created to kill might become useful precisely because he could no longer kill his way forward. So Magnus had waited. He had redirected. He had concealed. He had exposed fragments carefully enough that Russ believed discovery remained his own. There had been risks. An Imperial fleet might have found him. The Grey Knights might have followed some trace of corruption and intervened. One of the returned Primarchs might have learned enough to investigate. Abaddon might have sensed opportunity. Worse, one of Magnus's own brothers might have decided that whatever interested the Crimson King must therefore be worth taking. So Russ remained isolated. His trail was obscured from Imperial seers. False signs were scattered elsewhere. Demon princes who stumbled too close to useful knowledge were encouraged to wage wars against one another. Sorcerers who learned too much were given missions from which they did not return. Russ believed himself the hunter. Magnus allowed him that dignity, for now.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
An exalted sorcerer entered the chamber and bowed. Crimson King. Magnus did not look at him. The third vault. The sorcerer hesitated. Open it. All of it. My lord, the formations within have not marched since. I am aware. The sorcerer lowered his head. Magnus continued studying the golden lines. Wake the Scarab occult from the lower crypts. Assign them to the breach points marked in the 7th sequence. How many? All that remain combat effective. That answer produced another pause. Magnus turned. The sorcerer immediately remembered why even the greatest of the 1,000 Sons spoke carefully before their father. Is there uncertainty in my command? No, my lord. Then do not decorate obedience with questions. The sorcerer bowed lower. Magnus returned his attention to the model. Prepare the silver towers for translation, mutaliths to the outer roots, demon engines behind them, rubricae in depth. I want the first ranks expendable. The sorcerer looked up slightly. Against whom? Magnus smiled. That information is unnecessary. The sorcerer understood the rebuke. Most of the Legion would believe they were preparing for a new campaign inside the Eye. Some would believe the targets were rival warbands. Others would invent more complex explanations because sorcerers preferred elaborate lies to simple ignorance. None required the truth. Russ was the objective. More precisely, what Russ would become at the threshold was the objective. A key did not need to know which door it opened. Magnus dismissed the sorcerer and reached into the Empyrean. Real space answered. Across distant systems, cultists dreamed. A hab worker on an Imperial mining world woke screaming a Fenrisian word he did not understand. A corrupted astropath transmitted a warning toward Segmentum Obscurus, describing a non-existent invasion. A coven of mortal witches received identical visions of wolves burning beneath a red moon. 1,000 suns raiding forces altered course. Ships hidden for decades behind dead systems powered their drives. Sorcerers began seeding warp routes with false auguries, each sufficiently plausible to draw Imperial attention away from the true vector. Magnus did not know where Russ would emerge. That was the problem. So he would prepare several possibilities. Fenris mattered most. If the wolf returned, the wolf would seek the den. There was a poetry to that. Magnus disliked poetry when it interfered with certainty. On Fenris, the storm came down from the north. Njal Stormcaller stood upon a stone platform high on the Fang, while ice struck his armor hard enough to shatter against ceramite. Lightning moved through the clouds in branching patterns that made no meteorological sense. Fenrisian wolves howled somewhere below, their voices carried upward through wind that should have torn the sound apart. Njal listened. The howl came again, not from below, not from the mountains, not from the air. It came from inside his skull. He opened his eyes. Runes lay scattered across the stone before him. Bone, iron, stone, teeth. Each had been cast by his own hand. Each had fallen in the same pattern. Njal scowled. He gathered them, cast again. The same. He changed his stance, turned away from the storm, cast with his left hand. The same. That is tiresome, he muttered. The rune of the eye lay beneath the rune of the wolf. The mark of return rested beside a broken road, and through both had fallen an older rune. One Jarl had seen only in carvings preserved in the deepest halls, the Lost King. He stared. Lightning struck the fang. The runes jumped. One split, not broke, split. The mark associated with the Lost King cut directly through the symbol of the eye. Jarl felt every hair along his neck rise. He did not smile. Too many rune priests had smiled at omens. Too many skalds had proclaimed the wolf time across too many centuries. Fenris had heard enough prophecies to drown a world. Njal gathered the runes carefully. Then he went below. The Chamber of Awakening lay far beneath the inhabited halls of the Fang. Iron priests moved through incense and machine steam beneath the glow of ancient lumen strips. Cables thicker than a mortal's arm descended from the ceiling into a sarcophagus built before most imperial institutions possessed names. Wolf priests waited beside the coffin, while servitors connected power couplings and whispered machine cant through ruined mouths. Njal hated waking him without cause. Bjorn hated being awakened under any circumstance. That made the decision easier. Begin. The iron priests obeyed. Power entered the sarcophagus. Machinery growled. Locks disengaged one after another. Ancient systems performed rites of resurrection that were not resurrection at all, only the brutal dragging of a warrior's remaining consciousness back into the prison that kept him alive. The dreadnought chassis twitched. Optics ignited. Red light filled the chamber. Then Bjorn the Fell-Handed woke angry. "Who?" The voice emerged from vox grills older than kingdoms. No one answered quickly enough. Bjorn's power fist moved. Servitors recoiled. "Who has disturbed me?" Njal stepped forward. "I did." Bjorn's sarcophagus rotated toward him. "Stormcaller." I was dreaming." Njal knew better than to ask of what. "You may return to it." "Then why am I awake?" Njal placed the runes on the stone table. Bjorn stared at them. The anger did not disappear. It focused. "What direction?" Njal answered. Bjorn asked another question. "The taste?" "Old, cold, Fenrisian beneath the warp pressure." "The eye?" "Eye." "The pattern?" Njal described it exactly. Bjorn went silent. The chamber became uncomfortable. Even the iron priests stopped moving. Finally Bjorn said, "Cast again." "I did." "How many?" 7 times. "Again." Njal did. The runes fell. The same pattern. Bjorn stared. Njal watched the ancient warrior's claws tighten against the stone floor. "Wolf time?" Njal asked. "No." The answer came immediately. "You are certain?" "No." Njal almost laughed. Bjorn continued. "I have heard 10,000 years of certainty. Every fool with a dream sees Russ in a storm cloud. Every skald with too much Emjord hears his voice in thunder. Do not bring me prophecy." "Then what do you want?" "Evidence." Njal pointed to the runes. Bjorn's optics dimmed slightly. "He said something." "When?" "Before he left." Njal waited. Bjorn did not continue. "What?" The dreadnought remained motionless. Then, very quietly, "He said the road would not bring him home. He said he would have to break it." Njal looked at the split rune. Neither spoke. Logan Grimnar heard the report in the strategium. He listened without interruption. When Njal finished, the great wolf rested both hands upon the edge of the hololithic table and looked at Fenris turning beneath the projection. "No proclamation." Njal nodded. "No gathering of the companies in his name? No word leaves the Fang describing this as return?" Bjorn's vox boomed from behind him. "Wise." Logan glanced toward the ancient dreadnought. "I treasure the approval." "You should. It is rare." Logan ignored that. "Recall the ships closest to Fenris. Quietly. Increase auger watch on every stable and unstable route within reach. Rune priests report directly if they see the same pattern." And the great companies? Njal asked. Readiness only. If it is him? Logan looked toward the dark beyond the strategium windows. Then we will know soon enough. And if Magnus knows? Logan's expression hardened. Then we prepare for war. Upon Sortiarius, Magnus saw the omen bloom, Fenris beneath fire, a golden tree rising through darkness, a wolf behind it. The beast was colossal, its fur burned white, its eyes were hidden. Magnus reached into the vision. The futures divided. In one, the wolf guarded the tree. In another, it devoured the roots. In another, it lay dead beneath them, while Fenris burned around its corpse. Magnus pushed deeper. The possibilities multiplied. He tried to isolate the governing strand. There was none. For the first time in centuries, the vision would not yield. Magnus withdrew his hand. The chamber around him trembled. Not because he had shouted. He did not shout. Not because he had lost control. He did not lose control. But the air had become hot enough to soften crystal. The Crimson King stared at the golden thread. Hatred he understood. Rage he understood. Even grief could be studied. Uncertainty was different. Uncertainty was an insult. And somewhere beyond his sight, the wolf continued to walk. The corridor had been 300 paces long when Russ entered it. After 6 hours, it remained 300 paces long. That was the first lie. The second was Haldor Rune-Bitten's voice, coming through the vox from somewhere ahead, though Haldor walked only 5 strides behind him. Left turn, the rune priest said over the channel. Do not take the left turn. The words repeated with a faint delay, then came again in Haldor's own voice, but with a different cadence. Take the left turn. Jarl, take the left turn. Russ stopped. The corridor stretched before him in perfect darkness, pale webway material, arching above golden structures that pulsed beneath the floor, like veins glimpsed through translucent skin. No turning lay ahead, no doorway, no fracture, nothing. Behind him, Haldor coughed blood into one gauntlet. Bulvi looked from the blood to the corridor. That yours? Haldor spat. For now. His living eye was red. Blood leaked from the stone occupying the other socket and ran down his cheek in a thin line. The road is dividing. Russ did not look away from the darkness. No, our seeing is. Haldor breathed slowly. A distinction without comfort. Most useful distinctions are. The 13th moved closer together. They had learned not to trust rangefinders. One warrior's auto-senses told him the far wall stood less than a meter away, while his hand passed through empty air where the wall should have been. Another walked 30 paces toward a dead archway and returned 3 steps behind the pack without turning around. Vox channels carried orders Russ had not yet given. Twice Bulvi heard himself commanding the Wolfen to attack their brothers. Once Russ heard Torvald Ashhand laughing somewhere in the dark. Torvald had been dead for longer than Russ cared to measure. The road wanted him to remember otherwise. They continued. A body appeared ahead. Grey armor, old Legion colors, a frost blade broken across the breastplate. Russ recognized the dead warrior before he reached him. Skardi Wolfeye. He remembered Skardi being dragged through a rupture in a Geller field during the first days of the hunt. Remembered his arms vanishing into the warp before the rest of him. Remembered the blood striking the deck. Yet Skardi lay whole before him. His helm lenses burned. Jarl, the corpse whispered. The pack stopped. Bulvi raised his bolter. Russ lifted one hand. The corpse smiled. You left us. Russ walked past. The body vanished as soon as he ceased looking directly at it. That was the third lie. There were too many after that to count. The corridor became a staircase. The staircase became a forest beneath a purple sky. The forest became a street. Russ stopped. Ash touched his face. Not dust. Ash. Fine, warm, bitter on the tongue. Prospero. The city stood intact for one heartbeat. Then it burned. Pyramids of pale stone rose beneath a sky filled with gunships. Fires moved across balconies and gardens. People ran through streets littered with shattered glass. The air smelled of burning books, scorched flesh, ruptured masonry, and the metallic bite of discharged weapons. Russ's hand closed around Mjolnir. He knew the smell. That was the cruelty. If the illusion had been imperfect, he could have dismissed it. It was not. The heat against his face was correct. The pitch of distant bolter fire was correct. Even the peculiar mineral scent released when Prospero's stone was cut by lasfire was correct. 1,000 Suns legionaries stumbled from an alley. Not rubric, not demon. A man. Crimson armor polished bright beneath dust. His helm was gone. He looked young. Russ remembered killing him. Perhaps. The warrior raised empty hands. Behind him, civilians fled. A child screamed. Then Russ heard his own voice across the city. "Burn them all." He froze. The order echoed. His voice, his cadence, his anger. "Burn them all. Leave nothing." Bulvi looked toward him. "Did you say that?" Russ did not answer. Another version came from the opposite street. "Spare none who resist." Then another. "Kill the witches." Then another. "No prisoners." Some he remembered, some he did not. That was the weapon. Not accusation, uncertainty. The scene changed around him in fragments. Wolves broke doors. 1,000 Suns returned fire. Civilians died beneath collapsing towers. Legionaries burned. Books became sparks. Magnus spoke without appearing. "You remember poorly." Russ looked upward. The sky had become a great red eye. "I remember enough." "No." The voice came from everywhere. "You remember what permits you to remain yourself." Russ said nothing. The eye watched. "You were told I had betrayed him. You were shown treachery. You were given certainty because certainty is the narcotic of executioners." Russ's jaw tightened. Magnus continued. "And so you did what you were made to do. You struck. You shattered the legion that might have repaired what I had broken. You crippled the son who still understood the project beneath terror. You called obedience wisdom." Russ looked down at the burning street. A civilian crawled past him with half his back flayed open. "Are you finished?" Magnus laughed softly. Not remotely. The burning city became still. Every flame froze. Every body stopped moving. Magnus's voice lowered. "You would once have answered with rage. I. You would have called me liar. I. You do not now." Russ looked into the eye. "No." The silence that followed was almost physical. Magnus spoke again. "Why?" Russ's answer came without hesitation. "Because you are right." Bulvi turned toward him. The illusion trembled. Magnus did not speak. Russ continued. "I was used." The burning towers flickered. "I came to Prospero believing I knew enough. A pyramid cracked down its center. I did not." The great red eye narrowed. Russ looked at the civilians. "I killed your sons." Magnus's voice hardened. "My sons. I. You admit guilt. I admit mine." The city shuddered. Russ raised his head. "Not yours." The illusion split. Magnus's anger came colder than shouting. "You dare!" "I do." Russ stepped through a wall of frozen flame. "You broke Father's command." Another step. "You reached where you had been forbidden to reach." The city peeled apart around him. "You thought knowledge made you exempt from consequence." Magnus's eye blazed. Russ smiled without humor. "So did I." The illusion collapsed. For an instant, there was only darkness. Then Russ stood aboard the vengeful spirit. He knew that smell too. Blood, oil, burned circuitry, Horus. The War Master waited at the far end of the chamber. Not the bloated monster of the final siege. Not entirely. This Horus wore armor cracked by war, but still bore enough of the brother Russ had known to make the sight painful. The spear stood between them. Russ's old mistake, his old mercy, his old wound. Horus smiled. Again? Russ did not move. The scene unfolded. He saw himself strike. In one future, the spear went through Horus's heart, and the War Master died before Terra. The siege never happened. Then the Imperium fractured anyway. Lorgar claimed command. Perturabo turned the war into a grinding extermination lasting centuries. Another future. Russ died aboard the vengeful spirit. Horus survived. Fenris burned. Another. Russ spared Horus. Horus returned to himself. The heresy ended. For 7 years. Then something wearing Horus's face slaughtered the Emperor upon Terra. Another. Russ killed Horus. Sanguinius lived. The Blood Angels became something worse. Another. Horus died. Terra survived. Guilliman never returned. Humanity collapsed beneath a different war. Possibility opened inside possibility, until Russ stood surrounded by 1,000 Imperiums dying for different reasons. The spear lay at his feet. Horus smiled again. Choose correctly. Russ stared at him. No. Afraid? No. Then choose. Russ kicked the spear aside. I already did. The futures screamed. That was the only word for it. Entire histories folded into one another. Worlds burned and rebuilt and burned again. Primarchs lived who should have died. Traitors remained loyal. Loyalists fell. Terra became a tomb, a paradise, a demon world, a machine kingdom, an empty rock. Russ shut his eyes. The screams continued. Then one voice rose above them. Fenris. Russ opened his eyes. Arvek Iceblood stood before him, one of the last original Wolfguard. He had been with Russ since the departure. Alive. Still alive. But not here. Arvek stood barefoot upon snow. Behind him the Fang rose beneath a clean sky. Wolves ran across the ice. No warp storms, no demons, no graves. Harik Irontongue laughed beside a fire. Torvald Ashhand poured Miard. Skardi Wolfeye threw a bone at a snarling beast. All dead, all smiling. At the head of the feast sat the Emperor, whole. Beside him sat Russ, not the Russ who stood in the illusion, a younger Russ, unscarred, laughing. Arvek turned toward his true lord. You found it. Russ went still. Arvek smiled. The hunt is over. No. Arvek frowned. Jarl? Russ walked toward him. This is not Fenris. Arvek looked around. It is. No. Harik is here. Harik is dead. Torvald raised a drinking horn. Still sour, Lord? Russ ignored him. Arvek stepped backward. No. Come away. No. Arvek. The Wolfguard drew his blade. Russ stopped. Tears ran down Arvek's face. I will not leave again. You never came. I am home. No. The snow beneath Arvek's feet turned black. He did not notice. Russ smelled change. Not ash. Not blood. Warp corruption. It moved beneath Arvek's armor in colored threads. Arvek smiled as dead brothers gathered around him. Russ walked forward. The blade struck Elavagar. Arvek attacked again. Russ caught his wrist. Wake. Arvek laughed. I am awake. His eyes turned violet. The smile remained. Russ drew Mjolnir. Arvek saw the blade. He did not resist. Instead, his expression softened. Thank you. Russ cut through his neck. Arvek died smiling. The illusion broke. His body struck the webway floor. No snow, no feast, no emperor. Only a dead Wolfguard bleeding across pale stone. Russ stood over him. Bulvi said nothing. He did not need to. The corridor began changing again. Bulvi rounded on the Wolfen. Loose them. Several Greyslayers stared. One objected. They will kill us. Then keep up. The restraints came free. The Wolfen exploded forward. They did not follow corridors. They followed scent. Where the wolves saw doors, the Wolfen clawed through walls. Where Auspex marked an open route, they stopped and snarled at empty air. One plunged directly through what appeared to be a solid pillar and vanished. A heartbeat later, it howled from the other side. Bulvi grinned. Ugly bastards. Russ looked at him. They are your brothers. That too. The 13th followed. The palace resisted. Staircases turned upside down, passages folded, doors opened into memories. The Wulfen ignored all of it. They smelled what was real. That saved them. The first inferno bolt struck without warning. It passed through a grey slayer's chest and exploded against the wall behind him. The warrior dropped. Then the Thousand Suns opened fire. Rubricae lined the stairways ahead, silent behind blue helms. Bolters thundered. Inferno rounds punched through ancient plate. One wolf fell with his abdomen burned open. Another lost half his head. Warp flame washed across the corridor. 3 grey slayers became burning silhouettes. Their armor glowed. One continued firing until the heat cooked him inside his plate. Russ charged. The distance stretched. He kept charging. The stairway became 50 meters, then 200, then 10. Russ hit the first rubric hard enough to tear him from the floor and threw him down the staircase. The empty armor struck another, and both tumbled into the ranks below, dust pouring from split seals. Bulvi vanished through a side passage that had not existed a moment earlier. He reappeared behind the enemy. Chain blades bit. Bolter fire became useless at grappling distance. The Wulfen entered from above. The ambush collapsed into slaughter. Russ smashed one rubric against the wall, tore another's bolter away, and fired it through a third warrior's visor. The exalted sorcerer commanding them fled. Russ caught him before the next archway. Mjolnir removed the staff, not the hand holding it, the staff. Then Russ seized the sorcerer by the throat and drove him against the wall. The Thousand Sun laughed through his helm. "You are late." Russ tightened his grip. "Again? The fortress is complete." "What fortress?" "My father waits ahead." Russ looked into the sorcerer's lenses. "How many futures?" Silence. "How many did you see?" The sorcerer's pride returned. "More than your primitive mind could contain." Russ squeezed harder. "Count." "Trillions." "Enough?" "All." Russ tilted his head. "In every future, Magnus takes the root?" "Yes." "In every one?" "Yes." Russ leaned closer. "Did you see this one?" The sorcerer hesitated. Russ tore his head off. Armor seals burst. Dust poured over his gauntlets. Bulvi stared. "That was childish." "Aye. Feel better?" "A little." The palace screamed. Walls split. False corridors collapsed. The 13th gathered around Russ as the architecture peeled away in slabs of pale stone and colored fire. Beyond it lay darkness and gold, not reflected light, not sorcery. Radiance poured from a wound in the innermost webway, bright enough that even Russ narrowed his eyes. Then he heard it. Machinery, distant, immense, a grinding rhythm beneath reality, and beneath that, a scream, one scream, 10,000 years long. Russ stopped breathing. He knew that presence, not the tree, not the root. Something behind it, something wounded, something vast enough that worlds had been built around the consequence of its pain. Russ had stood before that presence once without needing metaphor. He had called it father. The golden wound pulsed. Haldor fell to one knee. Bulvi did not speak. Russ stared into the light. Whatever waited ahead was no longer merely connected to the webway. It was connected to the Emperor. The light did not illuminate the darkness. It replaced it. Russ crossed the threshold and watched shadow cease to possess meaning. Golden radiance moved through an abyss without walls, floor, or measurable depth, flowing in slow arterial pulses that seemed to originate everywhere and nowhere at once. Around him hung the remnants of pathways that had once belonged to the webway, pale arches suspended at angles that mocked gravity, fragments of causeway ending in open emptiness, bridges twisted until their beginning and end occupied the same place. Some pieces were unmistakably artificial. Others had been altered by so many ages of psychic pressure that even the distinction between construction and growth had become uncertain. Through all of them ran the root. Up close, it resembled no tree Russ had ever seen. Vast golden structures pierced the ancient pathways, branching through stone without breaking it, and joining one another across distances that his armor's auto-senses refused to quantify. One route passed through a shattered arch, as though both occupied different realities. Another widened until it became a road broad enough for a battle barge, then narrowed farther ahead into something no thicker than a vein beneath skin. The surface moved when he looked directly at it. Not physically. Memories flowed through it. Snow, fire, a hand closing around a blade, a city beneath a red sun, a child who had never existed crying beside a grave that had not yet been dug. Russ stopped. The images vanished. Behind him, Haldor rune-bitten whispered something in Fenrisian. Bulvi heard it. What? The rune priest did not answer immediately. Blood still marked his face from the Palace of Unmaking, but his remaining eye was clear now, wider than Russ had ever seen it. I understand the old tale. Russ looked back. Haldor approached one of the golden structures, but did not touch it. Not the meaning, the mistake. Bulvi grunted. That sounds like priest talk. It is. Then make it warrior talk. Haldor pointed toward the root. Men called it a tree, because a man cannot carry this inside his skull. Russ studied the structure. What is it? I do not know. Better. Haldor glanced at him. Russ's expression remained hard. I have heard too many men call ignorance knowledge, because the truth frightened them. The rune priest nodded. Then I will tell you only what I see. He crouched and placed a rune stone upon the broken webway floor. The stone rose, not floated, rose as though falling upward. Golden light entered it. For an instant the rune became transparent. Inside were stars. Haldor snatched it back. His gauntlet smoked. Patterns, he said. Memory, possibility, paths. Perhaps something that preserves what passes through it. Perhaps something that transfers one thing into another. Bulvi frowned. Souls. Perhaps. Thought. Perhaps. Blood. Haldor looked toward Russ. Perhaps that too. Russ walked onward. The route opened paths before him. Not doors. Possibilities. He saw them only from the edge of vision. Every branch seemed to lead somewhere different depending upon the thought that occupied his mind. When he remembered Fenris, one golden road curved towards snow beneath black skies. When he thought of Terror, the same road twisted toward a distant brilliance too painful to examine. When he thought of his father, everything changed. Russ stopped so abruptly that Bulvi nearly struck him from behind. There, a mark upon the root, not carved, burned. The golden surface had darkened around the shape of a hand. 5 fingers, a palm, nothing more. Russ stared. His hearts accelerated. He had smelled his father's presence before, not scent as mortals understood it. Recognition. The Emperor had always possessed a psychic pressure that lesser beings mistook for holiness because they lacked another word. Russ remembered standing before him during the Great Crusade and feeling the air become heavier without any physical change. He remembered the strange certainty that the man before him could have looked different if he wished, and that perhaps every son saw something slightly different. The mark carried the same pressure, older, fainter, but unmistakable. Father. The word left Russ before he intended to speak it. Bulvi became still. Haldor approached carefully. Is it him? No. Russ knew that immediately. No ghost spoke. No spirit waited. No convenient answer crawled from the past to absolve him. Only an impression remained, like a footprint burned into reality by something too powerful to pass without consequence. Russ placed his own hand beside the mark. He did not touch it. His hand was larger. He had forgotten that. The root reacted. Gold surged. Armor Elavagar vanished. Russ saw his own flesh. Then that vanished too. For one impossible instant, he perceived himself without body. He was enormous. Not physically. The concept of size had no usefulness. Something lupine moved within a storm of winter darkness. White eyes opening where stars should have been. It possessed jaws that seemed capable of closing upon worlds, but the image changed whenever Russ tried to understand it. Wolf became warrior, warrior became storm, storm became an executioner standing before a door that opened onto nightmares. Russ staggered. Bulvi seized his arm. The contact ended the vision. Armor returned. Flesh returned. The abyss became merely impossible rather than incomprehensible. Russ tore his arm free. Bulvi did not take offense. "What did you see?" Russ looked at his own gauntlet. "Me." Bulvi waited. "That was not you." "No." The answer tasted wrong. It was. Haldor's expression had gone pale. "The gene forges." Russ glanced at him. "Do not make claims you cannot prove." The rune priest lowered his head. But they all understood enough. Primarchs had never been only flesh. Russ had known that in the way a warrior knows he is being watched before he identifies the watcher. He had felt things in himself no genecraft could explain. He had watched Magnus wield power that biology alone did not contain. He had seen Sanguinius become something terrible and glorious beneath the pressure of fate. He had watched brothers carry presences larger than their bodies. Knowing was one thing. Seeing it beneath his own skin was another. The root pulsed again. This time it showed him war. Legions marching. 20 suns scattered across stars. Not 20. The impression shifted. Russ snarled. The root changed. He saw himself standing before a creature made from darkness that wore no physical form. He saw another brother speaking to minds that had not yet evolved. He saw warriors defending humanity from enemies that moved through dreams rather than void. He saw paths beneath reality opening, while human worlds burned beneath psychic storms. The images came too quickly. Not memories, possibilities, plans, fragments of intentions so old that even the distinction between what the Emperor had wanted and what the root merely reflected became impossible. Russ understood only one thing clearly. Conquest had not been the end. The Great Crusade had been preparation. For what, he could not say. Humanity changing, humanity awakening, humanity becoming dangerous to itself and everything around it. His brothers had been weapons, yes, but not all weapons were made for the same war. Russ saw himself pursuing something through an empire of thought. He saw Magnus standing before a gate of fire. He saw another brother whose face vanished whenever Russ tried to focus upon it. He saw the Emperor watching all of them, measuring, planning. Russ's anger came suddenly. He struck the root. Bulvi flinched. Haldor stepped back. Russ's fist hit golden material hard enough to crater adamantium. The root did not mark. "Was that it?" Russ snarled. The abyss answered only with light. "Was that why?" His voice traveled farther than it should have. "Were we sons because you needed sons, or because weapons obey better when they think themselves loved?" Nothing. Russ struck it again. "Did you ever look at us and see anything but purpose?" The root pulsed. An image appeared. The Emperor laughing, or perhaps Russ remembered him laughing. The vision vanished before he could tell. That made the anger worse. Bulvi stood beside him. Russ looked over. "Say it!" Bulvi scratched at an old scar beneath his beard. "I was wondering whether you expected the wall to answer." Russ glared. Bulvi did not move. "You knew him," Russ said. "No, you saw him. So did many. That is not the same." "No." Russ turned back toward the mark. "Perhaps he loved us." Bulvi shrugged. "Perhaps. Perhaps he did not. Perhaps." Russ's jaw tightened. Bulvi looked into the abyss. "My father once left me on the ice because I was too weak to carry the kill." Russ stared. "I know. I hated him. You were 8. Did he love you?" Bulvi considered. "Enough to make me carry the next one." Russ looked away. Fenrisians had never required love to be gentle. That did not make the question easier. They moved deeper. The golden paths narrowed around them until the wolves crossed a bridge suspended above an abyss filled with light. Below lay terror, not physically. Russ understood that at once. He saw the world as a wound, a vast pressure gathered around one point, so intense that every nearby pathway bent toward it. Golden force held the rupture closed. Blackness pressed from the opposite side. Countless lesser lights entered the wound and vanished. Souls, perhaps. Sacrifice, certainly. At its heart sat something that could no longer be separated from the machinery around it. The golden throne. But Russ did not see a chair. He saw a knot, a man, a machine, a gate, a prison, a lighthouse, a wound. All occupied the same point. Russ's hopes died there. Not all of them. The childish ones. The tree would not produce some shining fruit that he could carry to Terra and press between his father's lips. There was no wound in flesh to mend. Not merely. The Emperor had become entangled with Terra, the throne, the webway breach, and the survival of mankind itself. To heal one part might destroy another. To restore the man might break the gate. To free the prisoner might extinguish the beacon. Russ understood why legends had lied. The truth was too large. Haldor sank to one knee. All-Father. Russ grabbed him by the shoulder. Do not worship what you do not understand. The rune priest looked up. Russ's voice softened only slightly. I made that mistake with obedience. Haldor rose. The vision changed. Deep within the root, something pulsed in answer to the wound. Small, condensed, golden. Russ saw it as a seed because his mind required shape. It could have been a pattern, a key, a memory compressed until it possessed weight. Whatever it was, it resonated with the same structure bound around Terra. Russ understood enough to become afraid. Not because it promised resurrection. It did not. It promised possibility. A way to carry something restorative into the wound without forcing the root to open completely. It might strengthen what remained. It might reconnect something severed. It might allow the Emperor to change, or kill him, or change Terra, or tear the webway breach open. Russ stared at it. Bulvi spoke quietly. Is that what you came for? Russ did not answer for several seconds. I came for a cure. And? There is none. Bulvi's expression darkened. Russ continued. There is a chance. That enough? It has been for men with less. Red light entered the abyss, slowly, deliberately. The root recoiled. Magnus appeared on the opposite side. Not flesh, not truly. His projection towered above the broken pathways, vast wings spread behind armor made from shifting color and symbols that hurt to examine. His single eye burned brighter than the golden structures around him. Russ did not draw his weapons. Magnus smiled. You finally understand. Some, an improvement. Do not become sentimental. Magnus's smile thinned. You thought you sought medicine. I did. You sought architecture. No. Russ pointed toward the seed. I sought that. Magnus looked at it. For an instant his expression betrayed hunger. Then control returned. I have stood where you stand. Russ glanced toward him. No. Magnus's eye narrowed. I found this place before you learned that brute force was not philosophy. And it would not let you in. Silence. Russ smiled. That smile carried more cruelty than an insult. Magnus's wings shifted. I understood its nature, but it refused you. I mastered every equation governing its outer pathways, but it refused you. I traced the scars your beloved father left upon it. Russ's smile widened, but it refused you. The golden structures trembled. Magnus's anger touched the realm. Russ smelled triumph. Small, petty, human. He enjoyed it. Magnus recovered. There are explanations. I am sure you have thousands. Tzeentch's influence may contaminate my psychic signature. Aye. The breach beneath Terra altered my resonance with the webway. Perhaps. My ascension changed the manner in which ancient systems perceive me. Could be. Magnus's eye burned. Russ leaned forward slightly. Or perhaps it simply does not like you. For the first time, Magnus looked as though he might forget himself. Then the expression vanished. Laugh while you can. I am. You think acceptance means safety? No. That answer stopped Magnus. Russ looked toward the seed. I think nothing here is safe. Magnus studied him. Something changed between them. Not respect, recognition. The older Russ would have dismissed warning as manipulation. The older Russ would already have been charging. This Russ listened. Magnus saw it. Then listen carefully, brother. Russ did. If you touch that thing, it may cease to recognize you as separate from the root. Russ remained silent. It may alter you. Still silence. It may use you as a pathway. Magnus's voice lowered. And if you carry it toward Terra, you may connect the throne to something neither of us understands. Russ looked at the golden wound. Magnus continued. You could save him. The words were soft. You could kill him. Russ's expression did not change. You could open what he has spent 10,000 years holding shut. There was no mockery now. That mattered. Magnus believed at least part of what he said, perhaps all of it. Russ hated that. A lie was easy. Truth from an enemy required thought. He considered the root, the wound, the seed, his dead sons, the billions he had burned on the plague world, Torvald, Harek, Avek smiling as Mjalnar killed him. He had not crossed hell because he expected certainty at the end. Perhaps once he had. Not now. Magnus extended one hand. Walk away. Russ looked at him. That is your counsel? It is. You expect me to believe you wish me well? No. Good. Magnus's projection leaned closer. I wish you contained. I wish the seed untouched. I wish Terra exactly wounded enough to remain predictable. Russ's eyes hardened. There. Truth. Not all of it. Enough. You fear what happens if Father changes. Magnus said nothing. Russ turned toward the seed. The golden path before him had no opening, no door, only solid radiance. Magnus watched. Russ. The Wolf King paused. I may be wrong. Russ looked back. For Magnus, those words were nearly a confession of terror. Russ considered them, then nodded. Aye. He stepped forward. The root opened. Golden structures peeled apart without sound. A road appeared where no road had existed. Magnus's face changed. Not rage, not arrogance, shock. For one unguarded instant, the Crimson King stared at his brother, as though every law he trusted had betrayed him. Russ saw it, and smiled. Then the Wolf King walked into the light. The first horizon arrived sideways. There was no warning. One moment Russ stood upon a road of living gold beneath the impossible vaults of the root, and the next, a city the size of a continent crashed into existence above him, rotated 90 degrees from any sane orientation. Towers several kilometers high hung out over the abyss like stalactites. Streets ran vertically into darkness. Armored columns, caught mid-advance, continued moving for several heartbeats before gravity disagreed with the world that had carried them there. Tanks fell, thousands at first, then tens of thousands. They dropped from the sideways city, trailing crews, ammunition, banners, and burning fuel. Some struck broken webway architecture and disappeared in detonations of white fire. Others fell past the golden road into depths too vast for the eye to follow. Then the second horizon opened. A blood-red plain slammed into alignment beneath the first. Kornate armies were already fighting upon it. The third was a dead industrial world covered in fortress belts. The fourth was an ocean of black glass where demon engines marched upon the surface without sinking. The fifth brought a hive city whose upper levels were wrapped in blue witch fire. Then came the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth. Reality screamed. 9 battlefields existed around the route at once, not beside one another. through one another. The boundaries overlapped incorrectly. A trench line full of mortal soldiers materialized inside the lower decks of a fortress complex. Flesh and plasteel occupied the same space for less than a heartbeat before both were explosively rejected. Men emerged embedded in walls from the waist down, still firing until blood loss or shock killed them. A column of demon engines translated through an armored regiment and became fused with it, tank hulls protruding from red flesh, while screaming crews were dragged into bodies that had never been born. The first million died before any army understood there was a new war. Russ looked up. The sky no longer existed. Aircraft filled it. Gunships, stormbirds ancient enough to belong to the heresy, hellblades, corrupted bombers, things with wings, things that had once been aircraft before demon possession erased the distinction. They crossed from one horizon into another, vanished through ruptures, reappeared upside down, and collided in burning swarms. Macro-artillery opened somewhere beyond sight. The shells crossed two realities before striking the wrong target. A city wall disappeared. Millions vanished with it. Bulvi stood beside Russ on the Golden Causeway. "Well?" Russ glanced at him. That sounded almost thoughtful. "I was deciding which curse to use." "Choose quickly." The 13th gathered around them. Fewer now. Far fewer. The cost of the route road had been paid in names Russ did not need, carved onto stone because they were already cut into memory. Haldor, rune-bitten, stared upward, his living eye running with blood. 9 anchors. Russ followed his gaze. There, on each horizon, a pylon. Some were black obelisks, others fortress towers. One was a ritual engine made from chained psychers whose bodies had been fused into concentric circles. One stood inside a lake of blood. One was a silver tower driven point first into the ground. All pulsed in sequence. 9 beats. 1 cage. Magnus had not created these wars. He had done something worse. He had harvested them. Centuries of conflict, cult migrations, demon incursions, and carefully redirected armies had been arranged so that when the route opened, 9 battle realities would arrive together. A trap large enough for a Primarch. Bulvi looked toward the central road. "He expects us to hold this." "Aye. Then we do not." Russ smiled. "No." He pointed toward the pylons. "We kill the horizons." Bulvi's eyes narrowed. "All 9? 8. Why leave one?" "So we know where he comes from." Bulvi stared at him, then laughed. The sound was nearly lost beneath the war. Russ turned to the 13th. "Pax." No speech followed. No saga. No promises. The warriors divided. Grey Slayers gathered around pack leaders. Wulfen crouched among them, muscles trembling beneath scavenged armor. Ammunition was redistributed without argument. Grenades passed from wounded men to those who could run. Plasma weapons went to warriors whose armor carried enough intact cooling systems to keep them alive when coils overheated. Russ pointed. "Haldor, 3rd and 5th. The rune priest nodded. "Bulvi, 2nd, 6th, 7th. "You? 1st, 4th, 8th. Bulvi looked toward the 9th horizon. "And the last?" Russ bared his teeth. "He will bring it to me." The packs vanished into war. On the 3rd horizon, Grey Slayers entered trenches filled with mortal cult troops before either side understood who they were. Bolters fired at arm's length. Bodies burst against revetments. Chain blades bit through ribs, armor straps and spinal columns. The wolves did not clear the entire trench system. They cut one command line, destroyed 2 ammunition lifts, and vanished through a breach before the enemy command understood a foreign force had entered its war. On the 6th horizon, Wulfen climbed the underside of a fortress bridge while hundreds of tanks crossed above them. They reached the pylon without being seen, tore the guarding sorcerers apart, and vanished into the structure. On the 7th, Haldor called lightning through a sky that belonged to another world. The storm struck the pylon. The horizon flickered. Russ felt the cage strain. Good. He moved toward the first. That pylon stood beyond a Khornate army. Not thousands, hundreds of thousands. They covered the plain in red and brass. Mortal berserkers marched between ranks of traitor Astartes. Demonic cavalry prowled along the flanks. Blood crushers stamped deep prints into earth that steamed beneath their hooves. Above them hung banners made from entire human skins stitched together. Russ could have charged. The younger Russ might have. He looked instead toward the blood altars behind their formation. 8 of them. Demonic manifestations thickened around each. He understood. Hunt the priests. The wolves with him changed direction. They struck the altars, not the army. The first priest died with Mjolnir through his spine. The second was torn apart by Wulfen. The third tried to complete a rite and swallowed Scornspitter's last chambered round instead. The altars began to fail. The demons noticed. Khorne's servants believed sabotage meant challenge. Challenge meant blood. They turned. Russ withdrew, not away from the enemy, toward another. 1,000 Suns' armored host had entered the horizon from the west. Predators rolled beneath shimmering wards. Land raiders carried rubricae toward the central causeway. Sorcerers rode upon disc-like constructs above them, directing fire with gestures. Russ led the Khornate host directly into them. The first collision erased tactical coherence. Blood crushers struck the lead tanks hard enough to overturn them. Rubricae disembarked into a wall of chain axes. Inferno bolts punched through mortal bodies 3 and 4 at a time before detonating against warriors behind them. Sorcerers opened portals beneath charging berserkers and dropped entire cohorts into the glass ocean of another horizon. Then Khorne answered. Demons erupted from the failing altars. They did not care which army Russ had intended them to attack. They saw sorcery. That was enough. The horizon became an abattoir. Russ and his pack disappeared beneath it. Maintenance tunnels ran below the battlefield. The wolves used them while above. Hundreds of thousands tore one another apart, believing the other side had caused the disaster. The pylon died 3 minutes later. The first horizon cracked. Across the ninefold war, artillery intensified. A barrage fell upon a fortress belt on the 4th horizon. Not shells, containers. They burst above the walls and released things with wings and human faces. The defenders fired upward. Then a macro battery from the 8th horizon struck through the overlap. The entire fortress vanished beneath incandescent fire. Millions became vapor. Their remains condensed as red rain across a different world. Russ emerged into that rain. The 4th pylon waited inside the ruins of a command complex, protected by a super-heavy engine. It moved on tracks wider than hab-block streets. The machine had once been built in imitation of an Imperial command tank, but 10 millennia of corruption had enlarged it into something obscene. Gun decks lined the hull. Brass mouths protruded between armor plates. A tower rose from its rear, crowned by psychic conductors that fired blue light into the sky. Scores of rubricae marched around it. Russ looked once, then ran. The first energy blast struck Elevaga across the shoulder. Ancient plate exploded. Russ spun, hit the ground and rolled. Pain went white through his arm. He rose. A second beam cut past his head. The third hit his chest. Runes across Elavagar ignited. Russ was lifted from his feet and thrown through a ruined wall. Stone fell over him. The rubricae continued advancing. The wall exploded outward. Russ came through it bleeding. He accelerated. Inferno bolts struck around him. One burned through the outer plate of his thigh. Another opened his side where Khazagor had wounded him. He did not slow. The command engine fired again. Russ jumped, not over the blast, onto the barrel. His boots struck blackened metal. He ran along the weapon as it elevated. A rubric marine turned. Russ kicked him from the gun deck. Another raised a bolter. Hellwinter removed the weapon, both arms and half the warrior's torso. Dust poured into the wind. Russ entered through the firing aperture. The interior was packed with crew, some human, some once human. The first died when Russ drove Mjolnir through his sternum and pinned him to a bulkhead. The second had time to scream before Hellwinter split him through the pelvis. A third emptied an autogun into Russ's damaged shoulder and kept firing after Russ grabbed him by the waist. Russ broke him across a console. The upper half slid to the deck, trailing intestine. Alarms shrieked. Crewmen fled deeper. Russ followed. He killed the gun deck first, then the reactor command station, then the strategium. A sorcerer tried to lock the internal passages by changing their geometry. Russ tore through the wall instead. When he reached the command throne, the mortal prince occupying it raised both hands and began begging in 3 languages. Russ pushed him aside. Not killed, pushed. The man stared. Russ looked at the targeting array, then at the support formation outside. Understanding arrived too late. Russ pulled the firing rune. The Super Heavy's main batteries rotated. Its first salvo struck the Thousand Suns armor advancing behind it. 2 land raiders disappeared beneath the blast. The second salvo destroyed a psychic relay. The third hit the pylon. It cracked. Russ fired again. The horizon convulsed. He drove Hellwinter through the command console. The pylon died. Across the war, the 4th horizon collapsed. Everything upon it vanished, not destroyed, removed. Armies cut across the boundary were bisected cleanly. Half a demon engine disappeared, while the remaining half continued moving for several meters before organs the size of vehicles spilled across the ground. A traitor Astartes company lost its rear ranks to nothingness. One warrior looked back and saw half his own arm ending in empty space. Then the next horizon began to tear. Bulvi was there. Russ saw him through the overlap. The 13th had been reduced again. A pack leader lay headless at Bulvi's feet. Bulvi picked up the severed head by the hair. Not sentiment. Identification. The body was already buried beneath corpses. There would be no recovery, no funeral, no saga stone. So Bulvi carried the head and kept issuing orders. Left gallery. Melter charge. A Grey Slayer obeyed. A plasma blast struck him before he reached cover. His torso disappeared. His legs took 2 more steps. Bulvi did not look away. Next! Another wolf took the charge. That one reached the target. The pylon blew. The 6th horizon folded. With it went thousands of the 13th's enemies, and 7 wolves. Bulvi watched them disappear. No anger. Not yet. There was no time. The war compressed. 5 horizons, then 4, then 3. Every collapse forced surviving armies into less space. The killing became industrial. Armored columns drove over corpses until tracks lost purchase on pulped flesh. Demon cavalry climbed across tanks and tore crews through hatches. A warp predator larger than a Baneblade bit through a battle tank, shook it until men fell from ruptured side doors, then snapped them from the air. Artillery struck a mortal army packed between 2 fortress walls. Millions ceased to exist as bodies. A red mist coated both structures. A Grey Slayer emerged from it with one arm missing below the elbow and continued firing his bolter one-handed. A Wolfen fought with half its abdomen torn open, its intestines dragged behind it. It killed 4 cult warriors before blood loss finally forced it to its knees. Then it killed 1 more. Russ passed it without stopping. He remembered the name. That was all he could give. The 8th pylon died. The 2nd collapsed. Only 1 remained besides Magnus's chosen horizon. The final pylon stood upon a platform above the root. Haldor reached it first. The rune priest was dying. Russ knew it before the man turned. Both eyes bled now, even the stone. What happened? Too much sky. Russ almost smiled. Can you break it? Haldor looked toward the pylon. No. Russ raised Hellwinter. Haldor caught his wrist. Not that. Russ waited. The horizons are bound through me now. That was bad. How? I touched them. Idiot. Haldor looked at him. But useful. He placed both hands against the pylon. Runes across his armor ignited. The remaining horizons screamed. Haldor screamed with them. Russ grabbed him. The rune priest shook his head. No. Haldor. Do not make this smaller than it is. Russ understood. He released him. Haldor laughed once. Tell Fenris I had better weather here. The pylon detonated. Golden fire swallowed him. The final false horizon collapsed. The war ended. Not gradually. One heartbeat contained billions of combatants, demon engines, artillery storms, burning aircraft, collapsing cities, and the roar of armies spread across realities. The next contained silence. Russ stood on a field of corpses. Bodies from dozens of wars covered the ground. Kornate cultists lay fused with Rubricae. Demon remains smoked beside shattered tanks. Grey Slayers lay among enemies whose worlds had never occupied the same universe until Magnus forced them together. Blood ran in rivers between broken webway stones. The root pulsed beneath it. Bulvi approached. He still carried the severed head. How many? Bulvi looked behind him. The answer hurt. Enough to keep walking. Russ nodded. Then the sky opened. Silver towers descended. Not one. Many. They translated into the remaining horizon without distortion, positioned with impossible precision around the route. Scarabs appeared beneath them. Scarab occult terminators. Ranks upon ranks. Behind them stood Rubricae in disciplined formations. Sorcerers raised staffs. Mutaliths prowled between silver structures. The expendable war was over. Now came the Legion. The sorcerers began chanting. The collapsing boundaries stopped. One road remained. A bridge of light stretched across the corpses. Russ looked down at Mjolnir. Blood covered the blade. He wiped it across the pelt hanging from his armor. Across the bridge, red light gathered. Wings unfolded. The air bent. Magnus the Red stepped into the remaining reality. Not a voice, not a memory, not an image in glass. Enough of the Crimson King stood there to kill. Russ looked at him. Magnus looked back. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to introduce. Magnus spoke first. Do you remember the pyramids? Russ stood amid the dead and watched his brother descend the bridge of light. Behind the Crimson King, ranks of Rubricae remained motionless beneath the silver towers. Their bolters held across dust-filled breastplates, while sorcerers traced burning sigils into the air. Behind Russ, Bulvi gathered what remained of the 13th. There were too few to call a company now, too few even for the memory of one. Blood ran between their greaves. Broken webway arches rose from the corpse field like the ribs of some impossible beast, and beneath them the root pulsed with slow golden light. Russ rolled one shoulder. The movement opened the wound in his side. Blood ran beneath the lavagar. I remember many pyramids. Magnus's single eye narrowed. You know which I mean. Aye. Prospero hung between them without being named again. Magnus came closer. His manifested form towered even over Russ, red flesh marked by sorcerous sigils that crawled across him like living script. Vast wings unfolded behind his armor. Psychic fire burned around his horned crown without consuming it. You broke my sons beneath those towers. Russ looked toward the Rubricae. No. Magnus stopped. Russ continued. Your sons were still men then. Something cold entered Magnus's expression. These are what remain because of choices made long after you and I finished our first quarrel. You would divide guilt now? No. Russ lifted Mjolnir. I would place it accurately. Magnus almost smiled. Still pretending savagery is wisdom. Still pretending knowledge is innocence. The smile vanished. Magnus spread one hand. Look at you, scarred, diminished, crawling through the refuse of the Empyrean for centuries in pursuit of a myth. Do you imagine this proves growth? Russ considered the question. No. Magnus waited. Russ bared his teeth. Survival does. The air changed. Magnus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When we last stood against one another, you were an animal wearing a crown, and you were a fool wearing certainty. I have become more than I was. Russ glanced at Magnus's wings. That is the problem. The Crimson King's expression became almost curious. You still think humanity the measure of value? I think abandoning it because it wounded your pride makes you smaller, not greater. Magnus's eye blazed. Russ saw the attack before the gesture. That did not help. Gravity reversed. The corpse field became the sky. Russ fell upward. Bodies rose around him. Tanks, armor fragments, severed limbs and shattered weapons tore free from the ground and accelerated toward the black vault above. Russ twisted, drove Hellwinter into a broken slab of webway material, and held himself there with one hand. Magnus closed his fist. Gravity returned. Everything fell. Thousands of corpses slammed down at once. Russ hit hard enough to crater the pale stone. Elavagar screamed. Magnus was already inside his mind. Russ saw his own skeleton, not as an image, through himself, white bone beneath muscle, twin hearts hammering inside his chest, lungs flexing, blood vessels glowing red. Magnus reached into the pattern as though Russ were a diagram drawn upon parchment. Bone began separating from flesh. Russ roared. The sound shook the bridge. Runes across Elavagar ignited. The first ward burned out, then the second. A charm taken from a dead rune priest on a world without a sun burst into blue flame. Magnus flexed his fingers. Russ's left forearm bent, not at the elbow, along the bone. Pain blinded him. He drove one knee into the ground and forced himself upright. Magnus watched from 50 paces away. That distance might as well have been a galaxy. Mjolnir could not cut thought. Hellwinter could not reach a hand that killed from beyond striking range. Russ understood the problem. He had understood it on Prospero too. The difference was that younger Russ had treated distance as an insult. This Russ treated it as terrain. He moved behind a broken root arch. Magnus fired. The psychic blast struck the structure. Gold erupted. For a heartbeat, the root swallowed the spell. Russ ran. Magnus moved sideways without stepping. Space folded around him. Russ swung Hellwinter. The axe struck empty air. Magnus appeared behind him. One gesture hurled Russ through 3 meters of webway stone. Russ emerged from the far side, trailing blood and fragments of pale material. Bulvi shouted over the vox, "Anchors!" Russ looked past Magnus. There, sorcerers stood at intervals around the battlefield, staffs embedded in the ground, each surrounded by burning circles. Their chants held Magnus's form against this place. Russ understood. So do they. Bulvi laughed. The 13th attacked. Rubricae opened fire. Inferno bolts crossed the field in disciplined volleys. Grey Slayers answered while running, shots aimed not at the armored ranks, but at sorcerers behind them. A wolf disappeared when a warp flamer struck him full in the chest. Ceramite glowed white. His flesh cooked inside his armor before he hit the ground. Bulvi led 3 warriors through the smoke. They reached the first anchor. A scarab occult terminator intercepted them. Its Kopesh cut one Grey Slayer in half. Bulvi did not stop. He drove his chainsword into the Terminator's elbow, while another wolf planted a melter charge against the anchor rune. The detonation turned both warriors into silhouettes. The anchor failed. Magnus flickered. Russ moved. He came through the golden smoke and swung Mjolnir at his brother's throat. Magnus blocked with a blade formed from thought. The impact cracked the bridge. For the first time, they were close. Russ smiled. Magnus did not. Hellwinter struck Magnus's breastplate. Sorcerous armor flared. Magnus caught Russ by the throat. His fingers closed around the gorget. Still the same. He hurled him. Russ passed through a standing webway arch. The structure exploded. He landed beneath falling debris. Half his face opened from temple to jaw. Blood filled one eye. Magnus advanced. Again. Russ rose. Magnus shifted his stance. Russ recognized it. Prospero. The angle of the shoulders. The offered left side. An opening. The same opening Russ had once taken. He almost laughed. Magnus wanted repetition. Probability disguised as memory. Russ charged. Magnus prepared. At the last instant, Russ did not strike. He threw Hellwinter instead. The axe spun past Magnus and buried itself in the psychic anchor behind him. The sorcerer, maintaining it, looked down. The rune beneath his feet shattered. Russ hit Magnus with his shoulder. The Crimson King stumbled. Russ drove Mjolnir toward his ribs. Magnus twisted away. Not enough. The blade opened red flesh. Warp fire erupted instead of blood. Magnus roared. There, not pain. Offense. Russ stepped inside the reach of his staff and headbutted him. Bone cracked. Magnus staggered. Russ hit him again with his forehead. The second impact broke part of the horned crown. Psychic force detonated between them. Russ flew backward. He landed on his feet. Barely. Magnus's broken face healed while Russ watched. Do you believe adaptation makes you unpredictable? No. Russ spat blood. I believe your pride does. Magnus raised both hands. The root screamed. A spear of red light appeared in the air. Russ saw it. Could not avoid it. It struck beneath his ribs. Elavagar failed. The weapon went through armor, flesh and organs before erupting from his back in a blade of psychic fire. Russ stopped. For an instant, the battlefield became silent. The spear vanished. His side opened. Blood and loops of torn intestines spilled beneath the broken edge of his armor. One of the 13th shouted his name. Magnus extended his hand. Russ's heart stopped. Both, not entirely, crushed. Pressure closed around them from within. Russ fell to one knee. His vision darkened. Magnus approached slowly. Prospero ended differently. Russ could not answer. You broke my body then. Pressure increased. His chest seized. Now I understand yours. Russ looked down, not at the wound, at the bridge. Golden structures ran beneath it. Psychic anchors burned along both sides. Magnus saw the direction of his gaze. Too late. Russ drove Mjolnir into the bridge. Once. The stone cracked. Magnus frowned. Russ struck again. Stop. Russ struck a third time. The bridge broke. Both Primarchs fell. The sorcerous pressure around Russ's hearts vanished when Magnus's concentration fractured. They dropped into the root, not onto it, into it. Golden structures surrounded them as they fell between broken webway fragments. Memories flashed through Russ's mind. Fenris, Terror, Prospero, a face he could not remember, a father's hand. Then Russ hit Magnus. They crashed onto a route broad enough to carry a Titan. Russ was on him before either had recovered. He drove one gauntlet into Magnus's face. Again. Magnus caught the fourth blow and twisted. Russ's wrist broke. Russ head-butted him. Magnus answered with psychic fire. It washed over Elavagar. Blood on Russ's armor boiled. His beard caught fire. Russ kept coming. Hellwinter returned to his hand. He had no memory of pulling it free from the anchor. Perhaps the root returned it. Perhaps instinct had carried it. He did not care. The axe struck Magnus's wing. Bone split. Warp feathers became red flame. Magnus screamed and drove a knee into Russ's abdomen. Torn organs shifted inside him. Russ nearly blacked out. He grabbed the damaged wing with both hands. Magnus understood. No. Russ pulled. The wing tore. Red fire exploded between them. Magnus struck him with his staff. Russ's shoulder shattered. The next blow opened his brow. The third would have crushed his skull. Russ caught the staff under one arm. Mjolnir entered Magnus's side. The sword of Bal Knight sank deep. Magnus's single eye widened. Russ leaned close enough that their foreheads almost touched. Too far from your books. Then he twisted the blade. Magnus released a blast that threw them apart. Russ rolled across the root, leaving a wide smear of blood. Magnus rose. His damaged wing reformed slowly. Too slowly. The manifestation was weakening. Russ looked beyond him. 3 anchors remained. Bulvai's work above had broken the rest. Magnus followed his gaze. Understanding came. You have not been trying to kill me. Russ stood. His side continued leaking blood. No. Magnus looked back toward the anchors. You manipulated the engagement. Russ grinned. Careful. You almost sound surprised. Magnus attacked. This time there was no elegance. Psychic fire tore through the root. Russ ran beneath it. One anchor stood behind Magnus. Russ deliberately moved left. Magnus countered. Russ gave ground. The Crimson King drove him backward with staff and sorcery, each blow calculated to force the wolf toward the edge of the golden structure, exactly where Russ wanted to go. Bulvi appeared above them on a broken webway ledge. He had lost his helmet. Blood covered one side of his face. He threw something, a melter charge. Russ caught it. Magnus saw. Russ threw it past him. The charge struck the second anchor. White fire consumed the sorcerer maintaining it. Magnus's left arm became translucent. He roared. Russ charged through the sound. Hellwinter cut into Magnus's thigh. Mjolnir opened his abdomen. Magnus drove claws into Russ's chest wound. Russ snarled as fingers entered flesh and closed around exposed bone. Magnus leaned close. "I can tear you apart." "Aye." Russ looked past him. "One left." Magnus turned. That was the mistake. Russ tore free. Flesh ripped from his side. He ran. The final anchor hung beneath a broken arch over the abyss. 1,000 Suns sorcerer stood before it with both hands raised. Rubricae surrounded him. Russ hit them like a shell. Mjolnir removed one warrior at the waist. Hellwinter shattered another's helm. A third fired point blank. Inferno bolts struck Russ's chest. Elevaga blackened. One plate burst. Russ continued. The sorcerer screamed an incantation. Russ threw Hellwinter. The axe took him through the sternum and carried him backward into the anchor. The rune flickered. Not enough. Magnus was behind him. "Russ!" The Wolf King drew Mjolnir back. For a heartbeat, he saw Prospero. Magnus broken beneath him. The old hatred. The old need to finish. He could turn. He could strike his brother. He could repeat the legend. Russ smiled, then drove Mjolnir through the anchor. The psychic architecture broke. Magnus stopped. His body became red fire from the feet upward. He stared at Russ, not defeated, offended. Russ pulled Mjolnir free and turned away. That hurt Magnus more. "You would leave?" Russ walked toward the opening route. "Russ." He did not look back. "You cannot kill me." "I know." "Then face me." "No." The red fire reached Magnus's chest. His voice followed Russ across the golden path. "You think the seed will save him?" Russ stopped. Magnus was almost gone. "It may begin the wolf time." Russ looked over his shoulder. Magnus's face remained surrounded by flame. "The age your sons have feared, Fenris burning, the Imperium breaking, your return may not herald salvation." Russ considered that. Then he nodded. "Aye." Magnus's eye narrowed. Russ turned toward the route. The wolf time was never promised to be salvation. The last anchor failed. Magnus vanished without a scream. The route opened. Golden structures drew apart until Russ saw beyond them. At the center waited a light small enough to hold in a hand and vast enough to make the golden throne seem near. The heart of the tree. Russ tightened his grip on Mjolnir. Then he walked toward it. The others could not follow him. Russ knew that before the route closed behind his back. One moment Bulvi and the remnants of the 13th stood upon the golden causeway amid heaps of rubricae, demon ash, and broken webway stone, weapons raised toward the widening breach behind them. The next, the sound of the battle vanished. No bolter fire, no howling, no grind of chain blades chewing through ceramite, no sorcerous thunder, only silence. Russ stood alone. The tree did not resemble a place from within. It resembled memory made traversable. Fenris appeared beneath his feet first, not the Fenris of the Fang. Earlier, before the Emperor, before compliance, before orbiting ships brought war from the stars. Black mountains rose beneath an aurora that stretched from horizon to horizon. Ice cracked across a moonlit sea. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves hunted across a glacier, while tribes gathered around fires too small to survive the coming storm. Russ smelled salt, snow, animal blood, smoke. He saw himself as he had once been, young, wild, unclaimed, a pale giant beneath a winter moon, laughing while men twice mortal size died around him. The memory shifted. Terror, marble, gold, banners, the Great Crusade before anyone understood how much blood the future demanded. His brothers stood upon a balcony beneath sunlight. Horus laughed. Sanguinius smiled. The Khan looked bored. Dawn watched everyone. Magnus was talking too much. Russ almost smiled. The image changed before he could. The Emperor stood among them, not enthroned, not broken, a man, or something shaped as one. Russ felt the old pressure behind his eyes, the ancient certainty. Father. Then the others vanished. Only the Emperor remained. He stood before Russ exactly as memory wished him to be. Whole, calm, golden, untouched by betrayal. The sight struck harder than Khazagor's axe. Russ stopped. The Emperor looked at him. "My son." Russ said nothing. "You have returned." The voice was perfect. That made it wrong. Russ felt his throat tighten. The Emperor raised one hand. "Kneel." Russ stared. There it was. Certainty. Pure. Simple. The thing he had wanted across every century of the hunt. Kneel. Obey. Be forgiven. No more choice. No more doubt. No more weighing lives against futures. No more asking whether the All-Father had loved his sons or merely constructed them. Only command. Russ almost laughed. The Emperor watched him. "Kneel." Russ lifted his chin. "No." The word echoed. The golden figure changed. Its smile vanished. "You defy me?" "I made you. Perhaps. I gave you purpose. I named you Executioner." Russ's expression hardened. "That is why I know you are false." The golden figure's face shifted. "Not much. Enough." Russ stepped closer. "My father would not need to tell me what I was." The light around the figure expanded. Its body lengthened. Arms became wings. The face divided into dozens of faces, all speaking at once. "Obey." Russ did not move. The thing became enormous. A shape of gold towering above a battlefield that had not existed a moment earlier. Russ saw enemies kneeling before him. Traitors, demons, kings, every throat he had ever wanted to cut. The golden monster pointed. "Kill." Russ looked at them, then at it. "No." The command grew louder. "Kill." "No. They are condemned." Russ felt something old inside him respond. Instinct, weapon, purpose. The part of him built to hear a target named and make the naming reality. He closed his hand around Mjolnir. The false emperor smiled. Russ released the sword. It struck the ground. The smile vanished. Russ stepped forward, empty-handed. That was the trick. The battlefield trembled. Russ looked around at the kneeling enemies. A name. The golden thing recoiled. A sentence. The memories began to tear. A throat. Russ looked up at it. "And then I could sleep." The false emperor screamed, not in pain, in anger. Russ continued. "Prospero was easy because I believed certainty belonged to me." The sky cracked. "Horus was harder because I learned certainty could be false." Fenris appeared beyond the battlefield, burning. Terror taught the rest. The golden monster reached toward him. Russ did not retreat. "You gave me enemies." Its claws closed. "Life gave me choices." The hand passed through him. The illusion shattered. Russ stood once more inside the tree. Nothing waited ahead except light. No father, no brothers, no command. Only the seed. It floated above a hollow in the root, small enough to fit inside his palm. Too bright to look at directly. Not a fruit, not a jewel. A pattern. Lines folded into other lines without end. Shapes appeared and vanished inside it, each containing the suggestion of something larger. Russ saw a gate close, a wound seal, a dead star relight, a man breathe after an age of silence. Then he saw terror burn. The possibilities vanished. The seed offered no promise. That made it more trustworthy than the apparition had been. Russ approached. He reached out. The root withdrew. Not rejection. Warning. Russ understood. The seed could not simply be carried. Anything entering the warp could be stolen. Anything held could be taken. Anything external could be lost. The tree required an anchor, something living enough to cross the Empyrean, something powerful enough not to dissolve under the pressure, something already accepted by the root. Russ stared at the seed. Of course, he laughed. The sound was tired. There is always a price. The root pulsed. Russ extended his hand. This time the seed touched him. Pain became light. Every scar on his body opened at once. Russ roared. The wound Magnus had driven through. His side ignited first. Gold spilled from it instead of blood. The old scars from Prospero followed. Horus, the eye, Karzugor. Every cut, burn, puncture and break his body had remembered across centuries became a line through which the seed entered him. Elavagar caught fire, not ordinary flame. Every rune carved into the ancient plate blazed white gold. Russ fell to one knee. His heart's hammered. The seed moved deeper, not through flesh, through something beneath flesh. The wolf within him opened its eyes. Russ saw it again. Immense, bound, watching. This time it howled. The tree answered. Golden structures convulsed across impossible distances. Russ felt the seed move into his blood. For one heartbeat, every vessel in his body shone through skin and armor. Then the light vanished. Blood returned red. The seed was gone, not destroyed. Inside him, Russ tried to stand. The tree showed him one final vision. The Emperor, not whole, not enthroned, earlier, standing before a chamber filled with unfinished shapes. Primarchs, perhaps. The vision would not settle. Russ saw gestation tanks, then stars, then 20 shadows, then fewer. The Emperor moved between them. His face changed with every step. Father, scientist, king, sorcerer, executioner. Nothing stayed long enough to trust. Russ saw one shadow become a monster. The Emperor watched. Another fell. The Emperor watched. Another turned against him. The Emperor's expression did not change. Russ saw sealed orders, contingencies, weapons designed for brothers, paths prepared in case sons failed. Perhaps. The images blurred. Russ tried to force them into clarity. The tree refused. He saw the Emperor place one hand upon a projection of terror. He saw lines spreading outward toward futures full of war. Some ended in triumph, some in extinction, some in the deaths of sons who had not yet been born. The Emperor looked at them, then selected something. What? Russ could not tell. A path? A contingency? A sacrifice? The vision ended. Russ remained kneeling. That hurt more than certainty would have. If his father had known some would fall, what did that mean? Foresight? Preparation? Manipulation? Had the Emperor built sons while already planning how to destroy them? Had he merely understood that weapons sometimes turned in the hand? Russ wanted an answer. The tree gave none. He stood. Damn you! He did not know whether he meant the root or his father. Outside, the war had become a corridor of corpses. Bulvi fired his bolter until the weapon clicked empty. He dropped it and drew a chain blade. The passage before the breach was narrow enough that numbers should not have mattered. Magnus made them matter. Rubricae marched forward in silent ranks, stepping over the broken armor of those destroyed ahead of them. Inferno bolts struck the wolves' barricade and turned ancient ceramite molten. Behind them, sorcerers opened wounds in reality and forced demons through before the breaches had stabilized. Some arrived wrong. One thing came through without skin. It screamed and charged anyway. A wolfen met it. The creature lost one hand in the first exchange, then half its jaw. It continued fighting. Its claws opened the daemon's abdomen and dragged burning organs onto the floor. The daemon tore away the wolfen's left arm. The wolfen bit through its throat. Both fell. Bulvi stepped over them. Hold! No one needed the order. They held because there was nowhere else to go. A Grey Slayer fired a scavenged plasma gun until the coils glowed white. The weapon overheated. He threw it into the rubrique before the containment failed. The detonation opened the corridor. Armor became molten fragments. Dust exploded from broken rubric shells. The wolves charged through it. Chain blades struck. Bolters became clubs. Knives entered armor joints. The dead began stacking too high to step over. So they climbed. The corridor became a wall of bodies. Traitor armor, grey armor, demon flesh, human flesh from summoned cult troops. Everything pressed together beneath the weight of the next attack. The final wolf guard who had left Fenris with Russ fought beside the threshold. Eric Graveborn. He had carried 3 different bolters since entering the Eye and worn pieces of 4 suits of armor. He had lost 1 eye before Russ vanished into the tree and 2 fingers. During the Ninefold War, he still carried the old Legion axe he had brought from Fenris. A scarab occult terminator came through the corpse wall. Eric met it. The force blade entered beneath his ribs. He did not stop. His axe split the Terminator's helm. Dust poured over him. The blade inside his body twisted. Eric roared and drove forward. A second rubric fired. The Inferno bolt struck his back. Ceramite burst. His secondary heart exploded inside his chest. Eric remained standing. Bulvi saw him. Graveborn. Eric looked over once. Then the next wave hit. Bodies buried him. Bulvi never saw him fall. There was no time to recover the corpse. Only the axe remained visible for a few seconds above the press. Then that disappeared too. Bulvi killed the sorcerer who had ordered the attack. It changed nothing. More came. He looked toward the closed route. "Any time, King." The tree opened, not gradually. Golden walls drew apart. Russ stepped through. The battle noticed, not consciously. Something deeper. The Wolfen stopped first. Every surviving one turned toward him. Then the Grey Slayers. Then Bulvi. Russ looked older. Not weak. Older. Grey-white had spread through part of his hair and beard. Armor Elavagar still smoked from the runes burned into it. His wounds remained. The seed had not healed him. The wound through his side still bled, but the blood smelled different. Bulvi felt pressure behind his eyes. Not sorcery. Not exactly. Russ's presence had always been immense. Now something stood behind it. A second shape sensed, but not seen. The Wolfen lowered their heads. Russ looked across the corridor. "Where is Eric?" Bulvi did not answer. Russ saw the axe buried beneath bodies. He understood. For several seconds the battle disappeared from his face. Harek, Torvald, Arvek, Eirik, every wolfguard who had entered with him. Gone. Russ crossed to the corpse wall and pulled Eirik's axe free. Blood ran down the haft. He held it once, then handed it to Bulvi. "Carry his name." Bulvi took the weapon. "What did you find?" Russ looked at the traitor host assembling beyond the corridor. "Enough." "The cure?" "No." Bulvi's expression hardened. Russ touched his own chest. "A road." Bulvi understood only part of that. Perhaps that was better. Another Thousand Suns formation advanced. Russ drew Mjolnir. The wolves raised weapons. Bulvi looked at his king. Then what now? Russ watched the rubricae come. For centuries he had chased the answer deeper into hell. For centuries every road had led away from home. The hunt had taken his sons one by one, until none remained who had begun it beside him. Now the seed lived inside his blood. There was nothing for Magnus to steal from his hand. Russ bared his teeth. Fenris. Bulvi stared. The word seemed absurd in that place. Then he laughed. The old sound. The Legion sound. "Home?" Russ looked toward the approaching enemy. "No." He raised Mjolnir. "War." The first rubricae reached them. Russ killed it with one blow. Bulvi's chain blade started. The Wolfen howled. The surviving 13th followed their king into the retreat. Behind them, the tree closed. Ahead waited the warp. Russ did not look back. The hunt was finished. The road to the next war had begun. Every fire in the Fang leaned east. There was no wind inside the mountain. The braziers in the hall of the Great Wolf bent until their flames burned almost horizontal. Incense fires in the shrine vaults did the same. Heat from the Iron Priest's forges twisted against the pull of ventilation systems and pointed toward stone walls hundreds of meters thick. Deep beneath the mountain, where burial chambers older than entire imperial dynasties slept beneath frost and adamantium, votive flames guttered awake without human hands and turned in the same direction. Then the wolves began to howl. Not one pack, not one valley. Across Asserheim, from the frozen forests beneath the Fang to ice fields beyond the horizon, Fenrisian wolves raised their heads at once. Their voices crossed impossible distances. Sea wolves answered from black coasts. Packs hidden in mountain caves joined them. Great beasts prowling glaciers stopped above fresh kills and howled until blood steamed from their muzzles. Every rune priest within the Fang heard another howl beneath theirs. That one came from nowhere upon Fenris. It came through the blood. Niall Stormcaller staggered as though struck. The runestones before him lifted from the floor. He had not cast them. They rotated slowly in the air, each turning until its carved face pointed toward the same unseen direction. The rune of the Eye, the rune of the broken road, the rune of the lost king. The last began to glow. A crack appeared in the stone beneath it. Njal stared. Again. No one answered. There was no one else in the chamber. He looked toward the doorway. Again, he said louder, as if the mountain itself had failed to obey. The rune burned brighter. The crack lengthened. Far below, buried cogitators awakened. Most had not performed a full diagnostic cycle in centuries. Ancient auger systems built around technologies the chapter no longer entirely understood began generating streams of impossible data. Machine spirits wailed through diagnostic vox channels. Servitors turned their heads toward displays for which no command had been issued. A warp disturbance was approaching Fenris. Not translation. Not exactly. It possessed mass without mass. Psychic pressure without a recognized witch signature. Gene-coded resonance without a corresponding warrior identification. The chapter's archives searched for comparison. They found none. The oldest surviving data systems reached backward through 10,000 years of records and failed because the answer they required predated the structures created to ask the question. No living database in the Fang had been built to recognize the return of a Primarch. Bjorn recognized it anyway. He had been awake. That angered him already. Then something moved through the sarcophagus around his remains. Not current, not machine code. Memory. His remaining flesh tightened inside the amniotic systems. For an instant he smelled snow. Not recycled air, not sacred oils. Fenrisian snow. He saw a broad back turning away from him beneath the lower vaults of the Fang. Russ. Leaving. Bjorn's power fist clenched. Ancient servos growled. Iron priests in the chamber stepped back. One began, "Great Wolf, the augurs indicate—" Silence. Bjorn's voice struck the chamber like artillery. The Iron Priest obeyed. Bjorn stared toward the sealed doors. 10,000 years returned at once. Not memory. Wound. You will remain. He had obeyed. He had remained while warriors became legends. He remained while the Legion became a chapter. He remained while the Imperium forgot the truth of its own birth. He remained while priests turned the Emperor into a god, exactly as Russ had feared. He remained while false prophets proclaimed the wolf time, one after another, generation after generation. He remained while sons he had trained became names on stones. He remained while Fenris burned. He remained. And now something beyond the mountain had touched his blood with a hand he knew. Bjorn's sarcophagus rotated toward the nearest Iron Priest. "Bring Niall. He is already coming. Then tell him to walk faster." The doors opened before the priest could answer. Niall entered. He carried the cracked runestone, Bjorn's optics fixed upon it. "Do not say it." Niall stopped. "I was not going to." You were thinking it. That is generally difficult to police. Bjorn growled through the vox. Njal placed the rune upon the stone floor. It glowed. Bjorn stared at it. What changed? The pattern completed. Direction? Njal told him. Distance? I cannot measure it. Why? It is not traveling through the warp as a vessel would. Bjorn's claw scraped the floor. Taste? Njal hesitated. Bjorn's voice lowered. Say it. Fenris. The words silenced the chamber. Njal continued. Beneath ash, beneath blood, beneath something old enough that I do not have a name for it. Bjorn did not move. And something else? Aye. Njal's face hardened. Magnus. Bjorn's sarcophagus turned toward him fully. You are certain? No. Good. Njal almost smiled. But I would stake my life. That is worth less than certainty. You wound me. I have wanted to for centuries. Njal's expression became serious again. The storms around Fenris are being shaped. Emergence vectors appear and vanish. Astropathic traffic is being contaminated with false auguries. Someone knows something is coming and does not want us to know where. Bjorn's power fist tightened. The Cyclops. Aye. Then tell Grimnar. Logan already knew enough to act. He did not know enough to celebrate. That distinction governed everything. The great wolf stood in the strategium, while fleet dispositions moved across the hololithic table. Battle barges changed vector. Strike cruisers returning from distant operations received new orders encrypted beneath mundane logistical traffic. Ships already in the Fenris system moved into defensive patterns that looked deliberately incomplete to any enemy watching from beyond Auspec's range. No proclamation left the Fang. No feast was ordered. No Skald was permitted to speak the name of Russ outside sealed halls. Astropathic traffic concerning the omens was suppressed. Thunderhawks filled launch decks. Stormfangs and Stormwolves were armed. Gunships rose from hangars and disappeared into the clouds around Asserheim. Great companies received readiness commands without explanation. Some wolf lords complained. Logan ignored them. A commander who required every warrior to understand every order was not commanding. He was campaigning for approval. Njal entered the strategium with Bjorn following behind him. Logan did not look up. Magnus? Aye. How much? Enough. That is not a number. It is the best you have. Logan leaned over the hololith. Raiding vectors? Several. Real? Some. Which? Njal's jaw tightened. That is the problem. Logan grunted. Then we assume all until proven otherwise. Bjorn's vox rumbled. Good. Logan glanced toward him. You are becoming generous with praise. I may be dying. You have been dying longer than most civilizations have existed. Aye. Slowly. It annoys people. Logan pointed to the orbital display. Recall anything within reach. No grand muster. If this is a trap, I will not empty half the chapter into one kill zone, because a rune glowed. Njal looked at him. And if it is truly him? Logan's eyes settled upon the display showing Fenris. Then he will not need a feast to know he is home. Upon Sortiarius, Magnus opened the gates. Silver towers ignited across the demon world. Vaults disgorged rubricae in ranks so precise that 10,000 years seemed a moment between one footfall and the next. Scarab occult terminators marched beneath banners bearing sigils written in languages that had never belonged to human tongues. Mutalith vortex beasts strained against chains of thought until sorcerers released them into translation chambers. Magnus watched from above. He had lost the route. That irritated him. He had not lost the future. That mattered more. Across real space, cults awakened. A manufactorum world erupted in rebellion when laborers who had never heard the name Prospero began painting red eyes upon factory walls. An astropathic choir screamed itself to death, broadcasting coordinates that led nowhere. A convoy entering a minor warp route vanished after its navigator saw a one-eyed giant standing inside the immaterium. On other worlds, rituals began. Some opened breaches, some merely generated noise. That was sufficient. Russ would return to an Imperium already looking in the wrong direction. Magnus had no intention of allowing reunion to become legend. If the wolf returned, he would return into war. There would be no clean moment, no sons kneeling before their father, no uncomplicated resurrection of an ancient saga. The first sight Russ had of his empire would be fire. Magnus considered that appropriate. Then another possibility disturbed him. Perhaps Russ would prefer it. Inside the warp, the last road was dying. Bulvi knew because the walls had begun bleeding light. The surviving 13th ran through a passage that formed and collapsed beneath their feet. Behind them came everything Magnus had thrown into the pursuit. Rubricae marched through fire without slowing. Demons crawled across walls. Mutated Astartes from warbands, whose names meant nothing to Bulvi, charged among creatures without names at all. There was no reason to save ammunition now. Every bolt mattered only if fired. Grey Slayers emptied magazines carried through decades of impossible war. Plasma weapons screamed until cooling jackets ruptured. Grenades accumulated across centuries disappeared into pursuing masses. One ancient bolter fired its final shell and broke apart in the warrior's hands when its receiver cracked. The wolf carrying it looked at the pieces. About time. He threw the weapon into a demon's face and drew his knife. The passage narrowed. Russ smelled real space ahead. Not safety. Reality. The distinction mattered. Bulvi fired the last rounds from his bolter. The weapon locked open. He discarded it. King. Russ looked toward the narrowing gate. Go. Bulvi stared. Russ repeated it. Go. There are too many. Aye. That was not disagreement. Russ turned. The pursuing host filled the passage. He smiled. Then stopped wasting time. Bulvi understood the command. He hated it. Good commanders often did. The 13th withdrew. Russ remained. He stood alone at the narrowing throat of the road. Mjolnir in one hand, Hellwinter in the other. Armor Elavagar was barely recognizable beneath scars, blood, soot, and warp residue. Plates had split. One shoulder remained blackened from Magnus's sorcery. Dried blood covered the breach in his side. The seed burned beneath all of it. The first rubric marine reached him. Mjolnir took it through the waist. The second received Hellwinter in the helm. The axe went through ceramite, bone that no longer existed, and the dust within, then struck the warrior behind it. Russ kicked both corpses backward. They became an obstacle. That mattered. The enemy climbed. Russ killed. A demon engine forced itself through the mass, brass claws cutting apart its own allies. Russ waited until it raised one limb. Hellwinter struck the joint. Metal burst. The machine collapsed sideways. Russ climbed onto it and drove Mjolnir through the demon-bound core. The explosion threw broken armor across the passage. More obstacles, more bodies, more time. The enemy came anyway. Russ fought until the dead reached his waist. He fought from atop them. Rubricae became shattered suits beneath his boots. Demons died and dissolved, leaving gaps quickly filled by traitors. A sorcerer hurled blue fire. Russ let a dead rubric take it. The empty armor became molten slag against his chest. He threw the wreckage back. It struck the sorcerer and carried him beneath the press. A World Eater reached Russ through the bodies. The warrior managed one axe blow. Russ caught the haft and drove his forehead through the legionary's faceplate. The helm collapsed into the skull. Russ threw the corpse onto the rampart. Behind him the gate narrowed. Bulvi shouted from beyond. Now! Russ did not move. Something enormous entered the passage. The demons parted. The creature had too many arms and one enormous blade, its edges burning with warp light. Horns scraped both sides of the corridor. Its torso was plated in bone, thick enough to stop heavy weapons. A greater demon. Russ did not know its true name. He did not care. It roared. The sound ruptured lesser corpses beneath its feet. Russ dropped Hellwinter. Bulvi saw and swore. The demon charged. Its blade came down. Russ stepped inside the ark. The weapon passed behind him. He had deliberately given the creature what it wanted. Distance gone. Reach useless. The demon seized him. Claws punched into a lavagar. Russ let it pull him closer, then drove both hands into the opened seam beneath its rib armor. The creature realized too late. Russ pulled. Flesh split. Warp fire erupted across his arms. He dug deeper. The demon screamed. Russ tore through cords of unnatural muscle until his gauntlets closed around something burning inside the torso. He ripped it free. The thing might have been a heart. It screamed independently. Russ crushed it. The demon staggered. He seized one of its horns, turned, forced it backward. The collapsing gate touched its wings. Warp flesh vanished where reality closed. The demon roared and tried to push forward. Russ pushed harder. The breach contracted. One wing disappeared. Then an arm. Then half the demonic host behind it was cut apart as different sections remained trapped on opposite sides of reality. Bodies separated without wounds. Demon engines became partial machines, terminating in impossible smoothness. Rubricae were divided into armor, fragments that fell as streams of dust. Russ shoved the greater demon into the closing boundary. Its torso folded. Warp fire erupted. Then it was gone. Bulvi caught Russ by the remaining intact shoulder and dragged him through. The gate closed. Silence. Not the false silence of the root. Real space silence. Russ stood. Stars waited beyond the threshold. He stared. They were wrong. That was his first thought. Constellations had shifted. Regions he remembered as dense with light had dimmed. Other stars burned where no remembered charts placed them. Then he saw the wound across the galaxy. The Great Rift. Russ stopped. No vision had prepared him for scale. Warp light cut across the heavens like a blade drawn through creation. Psychic pressure rolled from it in waves. Astropathic screams traveled across currents no mortal ear could hear, but Russ heard enough. Worlds crying, ships dying, prayers. So many prayers. The Imperium existed. That was almost the worst part. It existed like a wounded animal that had survived too long because no one had managed to kill it. Russ smelled fanaticism through the psychic noise. Fear, decay, bureaucracy built into cathedrals, war without conclusion. His father's empire had become something built around endurance rather than victory. His sons had endured inside it, without him. For the first time in centuries, thoughts of Magnus became small. Russ's anger found a larger target. Fenris felt close. The seed burned inside his blood. Behind him stood Bulvi and what remained of the 13th. Ahead waited the age that had forgotten them. On Fenris, Bjorn turned toward the sealed gates of the Fang. Open them. An iron priest hesitated. Ancient One, the great wolf has not. Open them. Nial's rune cracked the stone floor. Golden light poured from the fracture. Logan Grimnar looked toward the mountain doors. Far away, Magnus watched his fleets begin translation. Silver towers vanished into fire. Russ stood upon the final boundary. One step remained. He thought of the night he had left. Bjorn standing in the hall. You will remain. He thought of every wolf who had followed him into darkness, and every name he would carry home alone. He thought of his father upon the throne, of the thing beneath his own flesh, of the seed, of the empire waiting beyond the gate. He had left the Imperium as the Emperor's executioner. Russ bared his teeth. Now he would discover who deserved execution.